I've been asked to say a few words, and I'll try to keep it to a few words on the occupation, just meaning the occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. I'll keep to that, omit the Golan Heights, separate but important issue. Just to let you know where I stand on the matter, so no confusion. I think there is a possibility now of a diplomatic settlement, pretty much in accord with what has been a very long-standing and extremely broad international consensus since the mid-1970s, namely a two-state settlement on the recognized international border with minor modifications. That has not been possible for one reason, because the United States has been blocking it since the mid-1970s and continues to block it, but that much is in our hands, so that could change. About 2/3 of the population supports it, but it has no effect on policy. The one formulation of that, there are various formulations of this proposal. One of them, the most reasonable one on the table, I think, is the so-called Geneva Accords being discussed in Geneva right now. Most of the relevant countries have lent support to it. The U.S. is notable by its absence, as usual. In my view, this is, I'm not suggesting it's a wonderful agreement. I don't think it is. I think it's the least unpleasant of the realistic alternatives, at least for the short term. Maybe it can lead to something better later on. But that's just so you know where I stand. You can triangulate as you like. I will review briefly, that's all I'll do, in fact,
be right back.
Some of the steps leading up to this. For many of you, this should be familiar. In fact, for everyone, it should be something you learn about in elementary school. So I apologize for saying things that should be at least well known and would be if we valued our freedom, but unfortunately are not well known, in fact, barely known. So let me quickly review. As I said, by occupied territories, I will refer to, take as a starting point, the effective international border as it was settled in 1949. That border, it's called the Green Line, divides the Palestinian state that was recommended at the UN resolution 2 years earlier. It divides it roughly in two, almost exactly in two. Half of it was taken over by Israel. That part is called Israel and it's not under contention. The other half was taken over by Jordan. That's what's called the West Bank, and that's the part that's under contention. So that partition is essentially
people being weird
finished as far as the international community is concerned, and it's not debated. The border.
I should just never answer my phone.
Until Israel invaded in 1956, but was compelled by the U.S. to withdraw. In 1967, Israel again invaded, this time with U.S. support, and conquered the Sinai, the West Bank, and the Golan Heights. That's the situation as it is now. What I'm referring to now as the occupied territories again are the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. The next, in November 1967, the Security Council accepted a U.S.-initiated resolution, UN 242, which called for a settlement on the international border on the Green Line. in the U.S. official version, with
broken through our line, have they? Always knew Grion weren't nothing but talk.
Dude, your mouth is too big.
Just as well. Past time me pets had their first taste of battle. Bird up.
Oh yeah, I saw that VCC TV.
Order to me. And what are the rest of you waiting for? Get out here! Order, order. Tell them how it's done.
minor and mutual adjustments, but essentially on the green, so maybe straighten out a curved border or something like that. That was the U.S. position. It was adopted by essentially the world. Notice that resolution was completely rejectionist. It said nothing about Palestinian
Tech
rights.
Tank, thank you for the $5 dono. I
It
appreciate
only
it.
reference to Palestinian as a vague, Palestinians as a vague allusion to unspecified rights of refugees. That remained, at that time, in 1967, the resolution was, it called essentially for peace, full peace treaty in return for full withdrawal, minor modifications and mutual ones. Israel rejected the withdrawal, the major Arab states rejected peace, things were at a standstill, until 1971, when Egypt broke the ice by offering Israel a full peace treaty, complete peace treaty in terms of official U.S. policy, in return not for withdrawal but for partial withdrawal, that is, withdrawal from Egyptian territory. The Egyptian offer said nothing about the West Bank, about the Palestinians, the Golan Heights. It said in return for withdrawal from Egyptian territory, Egypt would accept a full peace treaty. Egypt is the major military force in the Arab world. With Egypt out of the conflict, the military aspect of the conflict would have essentially been over. Israel understood that we have a lot of Israeli internal documents from the period, some of them secret then, some public, and they're consistent. They understood that there could be full peace at this point and integration into the region, but Israel decided to reject the offer because they preferred expansion. Expansion at that time meant into the Sinai. That was the crucial area. Israel this is a labor government, Golda Meir. Labor government was expanding into the northeast Sinai, from which thousands of farmers had been expelled, driven into the desert behind barbed wire, their towns, mosques, and so on, leveled in preparation for the building of an all-Jewish city called Yamit, which was a major project at the time. The crucial question was how the United States would react. As always, the United States is what one astute Israeli commentator, one of the major political commentators, really recently described as the boss man called partner, which is essentially accurate. So the question is how the boss man called partner would react. The boss man had an internal debate. It was won by Henry Kissinger, and the U.S. government decided to abandon its former position and accept Israel's position, and to follow what Kissinger called a policy of stalemate. Stalemate means no negotiations, just force. ended the Egyptian initiative. Actually, Egypt continued to put it forward in every way it could. The President Sadat of Egypt, who had initiated it, warned repeatedly that if Israel continued expanding into the Sinai with U.S. backing, he would go to war. And his phrase, Yamit, means war. Nobody took him very seriously. It was a period of enormous triumphalism in both Israel and the United States. Egypt was assumed to be a basket case, and it was just disregarded. In 1973, to everyone's astonishment, Egypt did go to war.
Ooh, so enthused. Hope it's good.
To everyone's greater astonishment, it turned out to be militarily highly successful. It was a very close thing for Israel. In fact, for the world, the United States declared a nuclear alert, and it was pretty tense could have been a superpower conflict, meaning the end. At that point, Kissinger recognized that Egypt can't simply be dismissed, and he initiated what was called his shuttle diplomacy, moving up and back and trying to arrange some sort of ceasefire. Without going through the details, that led finally to the Camp David agreements of 1978, in which the United States and Israel accepted Sadat's 1971 offer. Except that at that point, the offer was much less acceptable to the U.S. and Israel than it would have been in 1971, because by then the Palestinian issue was on the table. So the new Sadat offer in 1978 was that Egypt would make peace with Israel if Israel withdrew from Egyptian territory, Sinai, and also recognized Palestinian rights. That was new, not in 1971. The way this is described in the United States, it's called, and in fact in the West, thanks to the power of U.S. propaganda, it's described as a diplomatic triumph of the United States. In fact, President Carter just got a Nobel Peace Prize for it recently. Actually, it was a diplomatic catastrophe for the United States. It was an acceptance of a harsher version, from their point of view, of an offer that was on the table in 1971, which Washington had rejected, leading to a major war, almost destruction, years of tragedy and torture, and finally the U.S. Came around and accepted it. But history is written by the victors and the powerful. It doesn't necessarily have much relationship to what happened. You can check and see if you agree that that's what happened. And there's not really any controversy. The documentary record is very straightforward. By 1978, as I mentioned, by 1978, the Palestinian issue was on the table. That reached the international agenda in 1976, January 1976, when the Security Council created a resolution calling for a political settlement on the international border, but now different from UN 242, because it called for a Palestinian state in the territories that Israel would evacuate, the West Bank and Gaza. There was a very broad international support for that. It was supported by all the Arab states, major Arab states, by the PLO, in fact, pretty much by the whole world. The U.S. vetoed it. A U.S. veto typically is a double veto. It doesn't happen, and it's vetoed from history. So you have to work hard to find out about it. That was the first overt U.S. step to block the international consensus, which still persists. Same international consensus, same blocking. I won't run through the rest of the record, but from that point until the present, the United States has continued to intervene unilaterally, vetoing Security Council resolutions, voting against similar General Assembly resolutions, usually alone. Alone means with Israel, sometimes with the Marshall Islands or someone else who's picked up, but essentially unilaterally. and has also blocked all other initiatives. There's been a whole series of diplomatic initiatives, all blocked by Washington. That continues to the present. In 1991, just to move to the next step in the diplomacy, after the first Gulf War, the U.S. felt that it was in a position to, it had made it clear in the First Gulf War that the U.S. was going to dominate that region by force. Everybody else understood, everybody backed off. The U.S. was in a position to ram through its own unilateral agreement, so it assumed. The Madrid conference right after the Gulf War was called to institute the U.S. position. There was, however, a snag. There was an authentic Palestinian delegation headed by the most respected figure in the occupied territories, Haider Abdel Shafi, a conservative nationalist.
I do like those, Sakina.
Honest, renowned for his integrity and highly respected. And he simply refused to go along. He headed the Palestinian negotiation team, and they simply refused to accept the U.S.-Israeli demand that a settlement, a political settlement, permit continued U.S.-backed Israeli moves to settle and integrate as much of the occupied territories as they wanted. That was the point on which the negotiations blocked. They got around that thanks to the Palestinian leadership outside Palestine. It's called the Tunis leadership, the PLO and Yasser Arafat, who decided to undercut the Palestinian negotiating team and agree to a political arrangement which would permit continued Israeli settlement. That means U.S. funded and backed Israeli settlement in the occupied territories and further integration, building infrastructure and so on. That was called the Oslo Agreement, highly praised here. Grand meeting on the White House lawn, the day of awe, according to the Boston Globe. If you read the terms of the Oslo Agreement, the Declaration of Principles, it was completely obvious what was happening. The terms did refer to UN 242, but they left out all other UN resolutions which called for Palestinian national rights. Remember, UN 242 is completely rejectionist, nothing about the Palestinians. So the Declaration of Principles described the permanent settlement, the long-term settlement that they were going to reach, as based solely on UN 242, hence offering nothing to the Palestinians. And there was nothing in it about any bar to continued U.S.-backed Israeli settlement and integration programs in the occupied territories. The Palestinians did have a role. The Palestinian Authority was set up. Its role, as Prime Minister Rabin pointed out with great pleasure, was its role would be to control the Palestinian population by force and violence and terror. It could be as brutal as it wanted, as corrupt as it wanted. It didn't matter as long as it kept the Palestinians under control.
Sakina, I have played them in the past. I'll play one in the future, I'm sure.
They would be able to control the Palestinians without concern for human rights organizations, the Israeli High Court, mothers and fathers that don't like what's happening, what their children are doing, and so on and so forth. Standard colonial procedure, very familiar in the history of colonialism. The imperial colonies are almost always run by collaborators, not by the imperial country. Collaborators run the political system, run security forces. One of the shocking things about the American occupation of Iraq is that it hasn't been able to duplicate, amazingly, what almost every military occupation does quite easily. Very surprising. Anyway, that was the role of the Palestinian Authority. So things continued through the 1990s with continued, steady Israeli, U.S.-backed Israeli
Fiend, we haven't done the DLC of Hollow Knight
programs. The year 2000, the last Clinton-Barak year, actually had the highest level of settlement
Thanks,
since
Floopy the
before the
Floopy.
Oslo agreements, was continuing steadily, and in fact increasing.
Hey, Hustler.
And that's the core, has been the core of the territorial problem. There are other problems, but the keeping just to the occupation, it's a territorial issue, and that's the core of it. Camp David, there was another Camp David meeting in summer of 2000, where proposals were made. They were very highly praised in the United States as extremely magnanimous and generous and marvelous offer, which the Palestinians turned down because they want to kill all the Jews or something like this. There's a very easy way to test that thesis, which was essentially unanimous in U.S. Journalism and commentary. The easy way to test the thesis is to look at a map. It seems obvious. If it's a magnanimous, generous offer, then the map ought to show it. Well, that's not so easy, it turns out, because no one has been able to find a single map in the entire U.S. media. It's not that they were hard to find. I mean, they're available in the standard scholarly sources, which the press and commentators use when they want to. They were there in the Israeli press. They were there in critical literature. If you came to Talks of Mine and others, we described the maps. So they were there. They just weren't presented. The reason why they weren't presented is that it's pretty clear when you look at them. The generous offer broke the West Bank into essentially 3 separated cantons, a northern, central, and southern one, divided from one another by Israeli settlement and huge infrastructure properties, projects. All 3 of them pretty much separated, virtually separated from a small part of Jerusalem, the 4th West Bank canton. That's traditionally the center of Palestinian commercial, cultural life, health services, and so on. So 4 West Bank enclaves separated from Gaza, the future of which was unclear. So that's what many mainstream Israeli commentators rightly called a kind of a Bantustan settlement, referring to the South African model, which was in fact a conscious model, I should say. Well, magnanimous from some points of view, not from others. Just to be fair to Clinton and Barak, one should say that it was a considerable improvement over the existing situation. The existing situation was that the Gaza was split into 3 separate regions, 3 separate Palestinian cantons, and the West Bank was separated into 227 cantons, little areas, some a few square kilometers.
I read
basically
chat, Hustler.
Closed off. And this was going to improve it to 4 cantons in the West Bank and presumably 1 in Gaza. So it was an improvement. It's worth remembering that 227 and 3, because the current roadmap, of the quartet, it's usually called the U.S. roadmap, calls for, out in the distance sometime, a return to the status quo as of 2000. So therefore, it's interesting to remember what the status quo was in 2000. 227 Palestinian cantons in the West Bank and 3 in Gaza. That obviously wasn't going to go anywhere. However, negotiations did continue. After the Intifada broke out shortly after, negotiations continued in Taba, in Egyptian city in Taba in 2001, in January. There were informal but high-level negotiations between Palestinian and Israeli negotiators, and they reached a tentative agreement, which is available if you're interested in the Israeli press and the European press. I don't think there's never seen any discussion of it in the United States, except again around the periphery, dissident literature. There's a detailed description of it by the European Union Observer, which is accurate. It was accepted by both sides, published in the mainstream Israeli press, and it's a clear improvement over the impossible Geneva Accord.
Yay!
There were still points of disagreement.
Fuck this guy.
Points about Israeli salients breaking up the West Bank and so on, but it was a step towards a more equitable resolution of the.
We did murders! Yay! That was actually a really hairy mission. We almost died, like, a lot of times. But we're all Gucci now. It's okay, VCC TV. We're killing murderers who, are genociding our people. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. It's justified. For now. What we've done. You did a moiter. Good for you, kid. You're really going someplace in this world. Is Elon still the richest person on Earth? No, I do not. I think he lost that position. I mean, we talked about it earlier, VCC TV. Like, that is kind of the idea of this game is you're resisting an ethnic cleansing / genocide attempt.
The territorial problem.
Oh wait, we gotta start the next mission because there's definitely gonna be talking. Vanquish the enemy. Got it.
Who's there? Rebels! We're under attack! To arms!
It's fine. It's fine. We're inciting a revolt in a labor concentration camp. It's fine. This isn't going to backfire.
Well, that was terminated. Those negotiations were terminated by Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak right before the Israeli elections. It was thought that that ended it. We've recently learned that the negotiations continued, and they lead up to the Geneva Accords. If you take a look at the Geneva Accords, again, here you can occasionally find something looking like a map. They are considerable improvement over the Taba proposals, which were themselves a very substantial improvement over Camp David. You could look at the details. That's essentially what's on the table now. It could be, I think, to go back to where I started, the basis for a serious political settlement that would at least end the cycle of violence and maybe lay the basis for something better in the future. Is it just? No, it's not just. For one reason, Israel, incidentally, abandons nothing in the Geneva Accords, zero. To be precise, it abandons a little strip of territory along the Gaza Strip, which is not very important, and in return, it takes over a piece of the West Bank. But it abandons nothing in the, that's to which it's legally entitled, at least. The Palestinians do abandon quite a bit. They abandon a stretch of the West Bank. And crucially, a large section of the Palestinians are not represented at all, namely the refugees. They're not part of these negotiations, and their rights are essentially dismissed, several million people. So, in terms of justice, probably you can make all kind of criticisms of it. I should say many old friends of mine and longtime associates have signed protests against it, which I don't agree with, because I think my own view again, and I'll stop with this, that of the realistic possibilities, it's about the only one that has any chance of being implemented. In some other universe, one could think of other things, but people who are suffering and miserable and tortured can't live with promises of some other universe. They have to have solutions in this universe, is my view.
True.
Anyhow, that's where things stand now and how they got there as I understand it. So let me stop and turn it to you.
Thank you, Professor Chomsky. I would like to now present Professor Chomsky with a traditional Jordanian headscarf as a token of our appreciation. Recently, people have been associating these headscarves with terrorists and terrorism. This is unfortunate, and we would hope to fight this stereotype and
I believe this talk is from the 1990s. 2003.
Associate these headscarves with their true cultural significance. I would now like to open the floor for questions.
It's a long story. I've written a lot about it, so let me just refer you to what I've written, and then I'll just briefly summarize. So I've been writing about it for 40 years as internal documents have been coming out, and we get a clearer picture of it. There's a summary, at least the way I understand it, in a book of mine that just came out a couple of weeks ago called Hegemony or Survival. One of the chapters is about this, and it reviews what I think the record shows. In brief, it seems to me it's roughly like this. In 1948, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the U.S. military, was very impressed with Israel's military prowess and described them as Israel as the most powerful military force in the Middle East, second only to Turkey. Turkey was really the base of U.S. power and remains so, the main military force. And they said, well, sooner or later, we might want to think about Israel as a base for part of the U.S. system of control. What the U.S. is concerned about in the Middle East is no secret. It has the world's major energy resources, period. If it wasn't for that, it could go down the tube. And when the oil is finished, it will go down the tube unless something is done. These are serious internal problems for the Arab world, I should say. But as far as the United States is concerned, what's important is to control the oil. The U.S. at that time, in the mid-40s, State Department described the Persian Gulf resources as what they called a stupendous source of strategic power and one of the greatest material prizes in world history, the most important area in the world for foreign investment. Not a small thing. Kind of important, even more so today.
Only a little important.
And the method of control
Hey, Ashley.
of the oil resources was essentially taken over from the British. British had been the primary imperial power. U.S. was a secondary player up until the Second World War. The British, and secondarily the French, mostly controlled that region. The British technique was to establish what they called an Arab facade. That meant weak, pliable governments, which would control their own populations. And behind the scenes, behind what the British called various constitutional fictions, like democracy and freedom and parliament and so on, behind those constitutional fictions, the British would effectively rule. But the Arab facade would run it. Again, the standard imperial pattern. Pretty much what the U.S. is trying to institute in Iraq right now. It's almost copying the British model.
True.
France was a secondary power in the region. After the Second World War, the U.S. simply kicked France out on the legalistic grounds that France was an enemy country because it had been conquered by the Germans, and therefore its concessions were removed. You can do that if you're powerful. So France was kicked out. Britain was slowly reduced to the level of junior partner, and the U.S. took it over, but essentially with the British framework, Arab facades. The United States, however, introduced another level of control, what were called peripheral states, non-Arab states, which would be what the Nixon administration later called local cops on the beat. They were police headquarters would be in Washington, of course, and kind of a branch office in London, but the local cops on the beat would be the military powers around the Gulf region. One of them was Turkey. That was the main one, still the main one. Another was Iran. After they succeeded in overthrowing the parliamentary regime in Iran in 1953 and reinstituting a dictatorship, Iran was the second major cop on the beat. And the question was, Pakistan played a role, and the question was, would Israel be one of them? That's been the issue. Well, in 1958, there was a long step towards that. There was a very, I won't go into it in detail, but it was a very important year in the Middle East, and in fact in the world, 1958. Iraq broke out of the Anglo-American condominium. There was a military coup in Iraq, and it took over its own oil resources. There was deep concern in London and Washington. The British military base was Jordan, looked as if it was under threat. The U.S. sent military forces to Lebanon, apparently equipped with nuclear weapons. The concern was that Nasser of Egypt, who was the nationalist symbol, was influencing.
For a brief second, I had to wonder if he was mispronouncing NASA, and then I realized he was absolutely not.
Independent nationalism in the region. The only country in the region that offered any support to the U.S. and Britain at the time was Israel. Turkey, of course, but that's taken for granted. Turkey and Iran are taken for granted, but right in the region, Israel did offer some support.
OMG safe. Okay, good. I'm glad I'm not alone.
President Eisenhower and the National Security Council in 1958 internally concluded that, as they put it, a logical corollary of opposition to Arab nationalism is support for Israel as the only reliable base internal to the region, part of the periphery system. In 1967, that was just solidified. I mean, when Israel conquered, essentially it destroyed Nasser, who was the main concern of the U.S. And that was considered a great gift to U.S. power and to the facade. It was a defense of the oil monarchies against nationalism. And from then on, it's just continued. Israel's been regarded as what's called a strategic asset. In the early 70s, U.S. intelligence regarded the structure of the region, of U.S. power in the region, as based on a local tripartite alliance between Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Iran, with Turkey right in the background. Leading U.S. political figures who were concerned with the region, like Senator Jackson, expressed the same views. In 1959, the Shah was overthrown. Iran went off, became an enemy, and that just meant the role of Israel was more important. And in fact, the Israeli-Turkish alliance is extremely close. It was founded in 1958, a military alliance, that fateful year, and it's now Israel's strongest alliance after the United States, part of the whole framework of control. By now, Israel's become virtually a U.S. military base. It's It's got the most, it's a little country, a small country, but it has extremely powerful military forces. It has hundreds of nuclear weapons, other weapons of mass destruction. It's, according to its own military sources, its air and armored forces are larger and technologically more advanced than any NATO power outside the U.S. So it's no small thing. It's tightly linked to the United States in terms of its economy, kind of a high-tech, military-based economy, really closely interlinked with the U.S. It's coming to mimic the United States in other respects. It was at one point a relatively egalitarian, more or less social democratic society, kind of Scandinavian type social democracy. That's all completely gone. It's now, like the United States, has the highest inequality in the industrial.
And by the way, like, he's talking about this in 2003, 20 years ago, right? It had already gone from being kind of, like he said, like a Nordic model. Like, if you ever hear anyone saying, like, Israel used to be socialist, or Israel is socialist, what they're referring to here, is that past, where there was at least nominal social programs that were helping, like, working people within Israel. That is long been not the case, and it was even not the case 20 years ago. What we're seeing today is 20 more years of radicalizing underneath the most conservative, most extreme portions of the Israeli electorate. It's, yeah, he was sounding the alarm for decades, but, like, nobody listened, and also, like, this is why I talk sometimes about the fact that, like, even though people are saying, oh, Netanyahu is going to get ousted, they're going to get rid of Netanyahu, they're not happy with Netanyahu, I don't find that to be a very compelling or helpful thing, because frankly, there are both there are as far as politically anyway, there are hundreds of other people like Netanyahu who can immediately replace him. There are even hundreds of people who are far worse than Netanyahu who could replace him. You know, like, and they're gonna have ideologies that are even more extreme. Like you guys remember I went over that interview with the Israeli settler, right? One of the people that Netanyahu has had to work with to form a political coalition with is, like, the head of, like, the Israeli settler faction of Likud. So, like, when people are like, oh, we'll just get rid of Netanyahu, I feel like they don't understand that, like, the people who are poised to take over from Netanyahu are people who unironically would be like, yes, we must boost the birth rate of Israelis and outbreed the Palestinians while we continue to kill them at ever accelerating rates. Like who are like, yes, we agree with Netanyahu's desire to genocide the Palestinians. However, we disagree and condemn greatly his the slowness with which he acts. You know, like their problem with Netanyahu is that he is not genociding Palestinians fast enough. So I'm worried about what might happen in the near future here with Israel.
World after the United States, social systems collapsing, like in the United
Kashua
States,
becomes
and in other respects,
just
it's,
disgusting
becoming
powerful in this
similar
game.
to the boss man called
Cool.
partner, not surprisingly. But I think that's the core of the issue. I mean, there are other things, you know, there are other factors, but in my view, at least, that's been the core of it. Okay, so his very reasonable question is that
so much louder.
I said before that I think the current Geneva Accords, as they're called, the ones under discussion in Geneva, are the least bad, or maybe the best, the best plan that can be implemented. Why did I have the opposite view about the Oslo agreements Camp David and Taba? That's the question. Well, the reason is that these are the first agreements, the first proposals that do not institute effectively Bantustans in the occupied territories. The Oslo agreements in 1993 essentially offered the Palestinians nothing. As I mentioned, they didn't even mention Palestinian rights. And over the Oslo years, if you look at the successive agreements, again, I've written a lot about it, others have too, they simply institutionalized Israeli control over the occupied territories. When I say Israeli, I mean U.S.-backed Israeli. Israel can't do anything without U.S. backing. The Camp David Accords, as I mentioned, I think were a disaster. Taba agreements were somewhat better, but they still had those, they never resolved the issue. If you look at the Taba agreements, they never resolved the issue of the Israeli salients, the settlement salients that effectively broke the West Bank into three parts. It was left unresolved at the end of the Taba agreements. These proposals actually do offer a resolution. You can debate whether you like the resolution, but at least, you know, it would lead to a territorial division that allows for a degree of independence, subsidiary independence, no doubt. All of these proposals establish what Ehud Barak's chief
Itamar
negotiator,
Ben-Gvir
Shlomo
would
Ben
love
Ami,
it.
an Israeli academic, described as the goal of the Oslo Accords, namely a permanent neo-colonial dependency for the Palestinians. In one form or another, they all have that character. That's part of the injustice. But unfortunately, my view, that's at the moment, that's a fact of life. Until the United States and other international forces modify their position on this, I don't think anything more just can be attained. This is pretty much in our hands, incidentally. As I mentioned, the U.S. population, just to give you an indication of U.S. public opinion, which is rarely reported in the United States because it's too opposed to U.S. government policy. But the U.S. public is about 2/3 in favor of what's called the Saudi plan, which means total Israeli withdrawal from the occupied territories, none of this shenanigans around the border, in turn for peace. By a very substantial majority, also about 2-1, the public thinks that the United States ought to terminate aid to either of the two parties, either Israel or the Palestinians, which is not negotiating in good faith to achieve a political settlement. And
All right. Time for us to see what happens in this video game.
There's no time to speak to everyone. We should gather a small group who can serve as our heralds.
Did we do that? Yay! Leveling up! Hey, Nanya the cat. Ooh, I'd love some pizza.
Are you daft? We didn't come all this way to listen to you spout nonsense. We are not the enemy. Or are you so taken with your Galgastani masters you have forgotten?
There's no call for such rancor, Vice. We should hear them out.
Suppose we do fight. What then? Conflict will only lead to more suffering. At least here, the winds of war do not howl in our ears, and our stomachs do not grumble.
Shelter, fodder, you enjoy all the luxuries of cattle. Doubtless you will, so long as you remain. But do you not long to be free? To live as men? You are Wallister. Where's your pride?
Leave as you came. Let us live out our lives in peace. Today it's the resistance. Tomorrow, who knows what. but you all sing the same tune. My son sounded much as you do. The war claimed him 6 months ago. Will your violence bring him back?
We want no part of your fight. You're doomed to fail any road. Galgastan is too powerful. Heroes you may be, but the pride always comes before the fall.
Forgive me, I was delayed. Might I have a quiet word? I overheard your conversation. These people do not convince easily. No matter. We feared it would come to this. Listen to me. There's something you must do. You must kill them. All of them.
What?
Spare no one.
Oh no! Are we doing a medieval false flag? Oh, they want us to slaughter these innocent people so we can blame it on Galgastan. No! Oh dear.
What?
Are we the baddies moment?
The Duke foreknew this outcome. These are his orders.
Oh my god.
Why this? If you know even one reason, I would hear it.
Because his grace demands it.
Wait, this
If the
game has a
people of
politic?
Valmamusa rise up as we ask, well and good. But the words of these children will not be enough to move them to take up arms. When they refuse, you are to kill them under guise of Galgastani agents. Leave no survivors.
You can't be serious. You order us to kill our own.
Come, Leonard. You've a good head on your shoulders. Consider our situation.
I mean, I feel like there are a lot of extremist organizations who would happily kill their own to further their cause. This makes a lot of sense, actually.
If we are to defeat
From not
Galgastan,
in terms of
the
it being a good
Wallista must
idea, but
unite
like
as never before.
in terms of this being quite real.
If it appears the Galgastani destroyed Valmamusa, our people in the remaining camps will rally to our banner.
But, your grace...
Nor will opposition in the Galgastani ranks remain unmoved by such outrage. Balbatos will be beset by foes without and within. We will finally have both the opportunity and the moral imperative to rid the world of the creature.
Denim and the others will not do this quietly.
You will see to that as well, when the time comes.
Oh no. Do it or we'll kill you.
You are with me then. It is the only way. The future of our people depends on it.
No. Fuck that. Stop this lunacy.
Stop this madness. What virtue can there be in taking innocent lives?
You are yet young. Your heart is pristine, though I dare say your hands have seen their share of bloodshed. All that is required of you is to plunge those hands deeper. Bloody them not for survival, but for your cause. If you cannot do that, you do not belong in this battle.
Denim! Denim, are you alright? Vice, with us, quickly! Vice? What are you wait? No!
Oh, Vice, you piece of shit.
Kill them, Vice. All three of them.
What good are kinsmen who won't lift arms for our cause?
Oh damn, he got a
I'll tell you,
facelift.
they're as good as dead. If it's retribution you fear, fear not. They'll all be in their graves, thanking you for martyring them.
You know, this game is really pertinent to our current political climate. Fuck.
I don't believe what I'm hearing. If this is a jest, it is in terrible humor.
Quiet, Cashel! You've made a fool of me long enough. You remember that hare I snared in our leanest days, Cashel? You gave it to your brother to eat without so much as a word of thanks. That hare was for you!
Oh no, he's an incel too.
But you made a fool of me. You as well, Denham. You vex me. Always have.
God, just transition and kiss him.
Whatever gave you the right to command me?
The Duke gave such an order, Leonard. And you would carry it out?
Ours is to follow orders. I swore an oath before the Duke, before the realm.
You'd call such bloodshed service? Since when have we used our kinsmen's lives as leverage? Our lord has betrayed us all. To think I was willing to give my life for such a man. What a fool I was.
I did not think you want to abdicate duty, Ravnus. To break faith with Lord and realm.
I break no faith. I renounce the Duke. I renounce you all.
I always thought to find you at my side the day the Wallister won their freedom. But if men of our own blood would stand against us, why should I expect more of you?
Am I not Wallister?
Wallister descended from Galgastani's stock, but the fault is mine. I should not have placed such faith in one of mingled blood.
Oh, we got a racist! The ethnic prejudice runs deep.
How dare you?
Hear me, fierce warriors of Galgastan. We made this province to give shape to the peace we all want. Yet Ronway in Almorica and his rabble have trampled upon that peace and lifted their swords once again. We will not sit here and wait for death to visit us. We'll show them what it means to be Galgastani. Root out the Wallister in town and butcher them like the swine they are. Leave not...
Oh god.
Vice to me. Leave this to the others. We take the town.
Wait! Leonard! Vice!
Oh shit!
Heel, Ravnus. You yap like the mongrel you are.
Leonard, do not think you can escape judgment for your deeds.
Okay, save time. Bum, 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 ba-da-dum, bum, bum, ba-da-dum, bum, ba. You. My body.
It's that times of year again. Yes, that special times of year where we enjoy DIEDHARD season.
True, Die Hard season and Muppet Christmas Carol season. The two most important films of the season. Also, chat, we've been going for 4 hours. Hit the follow button. Hit the subscribe button.
Harm the villagers. We will defend them with our own lives should it come to that.
Hit the like button on the stream and consider dropping some subs or donos so that I can continue to live. Even though I'm sick and this is a low energy stream.
And if both parties are negotiating, the U.S. ought to equalize aid to them. Well, you know, if any of you are familiar with the actual aid flow, I mean, this is a radical revision of U.S. policy. I mean, just a total revision of it. In fact, U.S. public opinion is so extreme on this matter that these facts can't even be reported, and they aren't. So even though they come from the major academic-based polling agency in the United States.
This is the chaos route?
International policy attitudes at University
that
of
sounds
Maryland,
like a bad
very
ending.
Detailed, in-depth studies, which are quoted when they give tolerable results, but not here. And in fact, that means that people who have these attitudes probably think they're isolated. You know, they probably think I'm the only person in the country who believes this because you don't know that other people do. Well, all of that is important because it means there is a basis, a popular basis for developing political pressures that could lead to a political settlement, could shift U.S. unilateral rejection of even the Geneva Accords. But it has to be done. It's not going to happen by itself. Well, actually, I haven't read the book, and to tell you the honest truth, I haven't read anything of his since for the last 30 years, ever since he was publicly exposed, very publicly, in the Boston Globe, as a liar and a fraud and a fanatic opponent of civil rights. It's all in print. I can give it to you if you like, but since then I frankly haven't bothered. The question was, have I read Alan Dershowitz's book, and what do I think about what he said about me? All right, that was, as far as I was concerned, that was settled 30 years ago, and I haven't really bothered since. It's astonishing to me that he's able to survive the publication of what happened then. You can look at it if you like, but if you like, I'll describe it to you. The book itself, I've seen parts of because people sent me pieces, and it's just complete fraud. I mean, not even worth discussing. I don't like to give general comments without details in front of me, but if you can think of anything that ought to be commented on, I'd like to hear it. Yeah.
He especially had, or actually claimed that he could use historians that you rely on, such as Morris, to disprove your points.
Yeah. Well, actually, he's referring to, it's interesting what he does there, at least what was sent to me. I assume what was sent to me by several people, including his associates, was accurate. It's all the same. He quotes something from a talk that I gave at Harvard about a year ago. He doesn't quote from the talk, which is about a totally different. First of all, quoting from a talk is already childish and ridiculous. Nobody does it, especially when a ton of material's in print. But he didn't quote from the talk. He quoted from the Q&A, which is even more ridiculous. He quoted a comment that I made about Benny Morris in the Q&A, which was, of course, from memory, you know, part of the talk. Turns out the quote was almost a word-for-word paraphrase of what Morris actually said. Okay, so what he quoted was a comment of mine in
good point, Paladin.
Informal Q&A referring to Benny Morris, and in fact, almost precise, you know, so close to accurate, it could have been in a scholarly article and no one would have noticed it. It wasn't a quote, of course, it was a paraphrase, but it happened to be almost verbatim. And that's what he says he can refute, citing Benny Morris. And I'll give you the wording if you like, but that's the way it continues. It's a joke. Well, the question had to do with Russian policy throughout this whole period and the U-turn in it in recent years. Actually, there's been no U-turn. Russian policy throughout this period was right in the heart of the international consensus. I mean, there's all kind of issues you could talk about, but of the issues that I've been discussing, the diplomacy, Russia was no different from Western Europe as far as the diplomacy was concerned. They supported the international consensus since the mid-1970s. They continued to support it. Brezhnev put forth his own plan.
I mean, you don't have to prove
identical.
it. It just is a
And
Christmas
they backed
movie.
all the UN
It takes place during
resolutions.
Christmas time.
They
It's
were
got
right
Christmas
in the
songs in
core
it.
of the international consensus.
Has
And
Hans
they
Gruber
still
going,
are.
ho, ho.
I mean, there is a
ho.
change in policy, but in lots of ways, but not on the diplomacy of the Middle East. I mean, because there really hasn't been any change in the international position. You know, slight modifications, but the
Thank you for the
international
$5
position,
dono.
which has just been an overwhelming
Means a lot. Thank you
consensus,
so much for supporting the
is,
channel.
has been pretty stable. It's been blocked by the
Am I
United
doing a
States,
Die
but,
Hard? No,
one else.
my enemies are.
Doesn't exert much pressure. I mean, it did support the Arab states. So it supported the Arab states militarily. It gave some tepid support to the Palestinians, not amounting to much. But you know, that's part of the Cold War. If the United States militarily supports one side, the Russians support the other, so on. But it had almost nothing to do with the diplomacy. Israeli military power was backed by the U.S. and Turkey and so on. It was just overwhelming. As I mentioned, by now Israel was more powerful than any NATO power. It's not Russia, but you know, England, France, etc. Well, I mean, there are unpleasant things going on in the United States and internal to Israel, but by comparative standards, by world standards, the United States and Israel for Jews are both very free societies. So we're not under, you don't have to be afraid of the police when you walk outside. Yeah, sure, for marginalized communities, true, but that's always been true. In fact, it's been much worse in the past. I mean, look, it's not good now. A lot of terrible things are happening now. So what's happening, say, under the Patriot Act, it should not be tolerated in a democratic society. On the other hand, we should also be realistic. By comparative standards, either to the rest of the world or even the recent U.S. history, it's not out of sight. I mean, the programs of internal repression that ran through the Kennedy to Nixon administrations were much more serious than what's happening now. They're also not reported much because it's the wrong story.
Oh, my body. Everything hurts.
COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program, which was
Should I
run by
order
the
some
National
food?
Political Police, the FBI, from Kennedy, actually started under Eisenhower, mainly Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon until it was finally stopped by the courts, was theoretically at least, was far more severe repression than anything that exists now. I mean, it went all the way to political assassination. It was really no joke. And even that didn't begin to compare with Woodrow Wilson's Red Scare, which was incomparably worse than either of them. So there has been a general improvement. I mean, Ashcroft would doubtless like to drive it back, and there's plenty of things that should not be tolerated. But the repression is restricted in the United States to highly vulnerable people. Of course, that's not a compliment, but and it shouldn't be tolerated. But it's realistic, and by comparison with other parts of the world, it's hardly repression. And for Jews in Israel, it's the same. For Palestinians, of course, it's a vicious and harsh military occupation, as it's been for 35 years. I mean, it's different than it was in earlier years, so going to be more black faces in Harvard and MIT than there were 30 years ago. On the other hand, if you take a look at the prison population, I mean, it's just outrageous. A huge part of the black and Latino population are simply thrown into jail. That's mainly what the
Red Robin, I call out to thee.
It's a device for getting rid of superfluous people by tossing them into jail. And that certainly should not be tolerated. But again, If you go back, say, to 30 years, 35 years, COINTELPRO reached the point of literally assassinating black organizers, assassinating them. You know, Fred Hampton was murdered in his bed in a Chicago police raid set up by the FBI, probably drugged, murdered another guy too, and nobody cared. You know, in fact, I went to his funeral in Chicago. I think I was one of about 10 white faces in a huge...
No, I didn't know that Chomsky went to Fred Hampton's funeral. That's cool.
Black audience. And nobody cared. In fact, probably very few even know about it, because that was just what you do to people, you know. And that's not the only case. It happens to be the worst case. But that's not happening now. Bad things are, but not that. You know. This had to do with the assassination and the use of force by U.S. forces in Iraq and borrowings from Israel. That's been reported in the press in the last couple of days, the U.S. press and the British press, that the U.S. government denies it, but reports are that they're getting Israeli intelligence to help them out with control of the population. Frankly, I tend to think that the U.S. government denials are probably accurate. The reason is that these kinds of vicious tactics are just second nature to military forces anyway. They don't have to get advice from anyone. It's not that there's some, sophisticated techniques that we couldn't think of in 10 minutes. There was a limited number of ways of controlling people by violence. So maybe the denials are accurate, but it's probable that they're interacting. If you want to know what it is, they're telling you straight out, so there's nothing for me to say. There was a front page story, the lead story in the New York Times 3 or 4 days ago, a couple of days ago, was by Dexter Filkins. And, well, you read it yourself, but to me it came straight out, it seemed it was coming straight out of the Nazi archives. It quoted U.S. military officers as saying, the Arab mind understands only force and, honor or something, and went on to say, the way you have to control these people is by showing them that you can use force and crush them, and then they'll respect you. Well, that's very familiar. You're all Harvard students. You've read history. You know exactly what page of history it comes from. Putting aside the Nazi archives, it comes straight out of the British Empire.
I ordered a
Take look
pizza,
at the,
chat. Yeah.
Encyclopedia Britannica. I've got the edition that was given to me on my bar mitzvah, so it's an old edition. It's 1939. But if you look at the 1939 edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica, and you look at the section on India, it's written by some British military officer who describes how the Punjabis, the military caste in India, enjoyed being beaten up. And when the British beat the shit out of them, they really respected the British for that. And after that, they kind of, followed what the British wanted. You think I'm exaggerating? Look it up. It doesn't say beat the shit out of, but other than that, it approximately says that. And that's the standard view about the natives. What you have to do is smash them in the face. They don't understand anything. They're barbarians. They like force. They love force, and they respect force. And when you do that, you've got them under control. That's the Arab mind. If something like that were said about the Jewish mind on the front page of the New York Times, the country would explode. But when you say it about the Arab mind, it's okay. In fact, you can find distinguished Harvard professors who write things not very different from that, and nobody cares. So yes, the tactics are familiar. If they're getting them from Israel, I don't know. Maybe they are, but it's mostly second nature to conquerors. So suppose let's see if I understood it. If the United States secured its own resources, what would its strategy be in the region? Exactly the same as it is now, because it has nothing to do with U.S. access to those resources. And if you think about the history, you'll see that. I started from 1945, when the U.S. took over the region because it was a stupendous source of strategic power and one of the greatest material prizes in world history. Well, that would remain true if, at that time, the United States was the major, North America was the major oil producer in the world. The U.S. wasn't using those resources. In fact, the U.S. remained the North America, that includes the Gulf and so on, was the major oil producer until, I think, around 1970. But it still had to maintain control of those resources. This is control, not access. If you look at U.S. Intelligence projections, contemporary U.S. intelligence projections for the next 15 years or so, they're public and worth looking at. They predict that the Persian Gulf will be even more important in the future. In fact, it'll provide about 2/3 of world energy resources in the next roughly 15 years, but the U.S. won't rely on them. They say the U.S. itself will rely on more stable West Atlantic Basin resources, like West Africa. It's one of the reasons for the concern and intervention in West Africa and the Western Hemisphere. Again, that's one of the reasons for the concern about the turmoil in the Andes, which are sort of getting out of control and a very likely target of U.S. military intervention, because that's regarded as one of the potential major energy resources. But even if the U.S., so they themselves are expecting to rely on resources that are less hazardous, more stable, but they still want to control the most stupendous source of strategic power and one of the greatest material prizes in world history. In fact, if the U.S. went to renewable energy tomorrow, I don't think policy would change. This is a lever of world control. You control the Gulf energy resources, you pretty much control the world. And the material prize means huge profits. I mean, again, read this morning's, I think, front page of the New York Times. Yeah, front page, there's a story on how Halliburton is gouging you and your parents by charging ludicrous prices to import Kuwaiti oil into Iraq, about twice as much as Iraq and Kuwait pay. Yeah, that's a great material prize. It yields what one major historian of the oil industry called profits beyond the dream of avarice, and it still does for the future. That's even if we use renewable energy. And the stupendous source of strategic power remains. Controlling the world is not an easy business. It's a tough job for those guys in Washington. The international society is not dominated by the United States. From an economic point of view, the United States is just one of a number of equals. Europe's approximately like the United States. Northeast Asia has a greater gross domestic product than the U.S. does, considerably greater, about 50% greater, and holds about half of U.S. of global foreign exchange, and is the most dynamic region in the world. Also has resources. Actually, Laura Tyson, who was chair of the Council on Economic Advisors under Clinton, just described, a couple days ago, described the world economy briefly, very succinctly, in 4 words. He said the world economy is based on the principle that America spends, Asia lends. And that's more or less accurate. And that's a very fragile situation. There's only one dimension in which the U.S. is overwhelmingly dominant, namely violence.
True.
That's why the Bush administration, which happens to be rather extreme, but it's not a pretty narrow spectrum, does want the world to be organized on the basis of force. It makes very good sense, You play your strong card, and the strong card for the United States is force, not economy, not culture, not other things. It's force. The U.S. spends roughly about as much as the rest of the world combined in military force, and is technologically far more advanced. Right now at the United Nations, if we had something like a free press in the country, what you'd be reading on the front page is what's going on at the General Assembly right now. Every day, there's debates on the disarmament committee.
It's wild that this talk happened 20 years ago, and so much of it is still relevant today. in 2003, I'm not sure if China's Belt and Road Initiative had even like taken off yet. But like, it's essentially what he's describing here, you know, like the China lens mentality.
The UN Disarmament Committee on Disarmament and International Security, or some such name, is having its meetings right now, and as usual, you know, year after year this goes on unreported. The world is trying to block the militarization of space and the increase of nuclear weapons, and the U.S. is preventing it. That went on under Clinton. It's going on now. The U.S. is moving on to militarization of space, which is extremely hazardous, may destroy all of us. It's no joke. Right after the U.S. announced the National Security Strategy in September 2002, the invasion of Iraq, same time. 2 months later, the Space Command.
Thank you for the $5 dono, Catalina Gearbox. I very, very much appreciate it. On especially these slower streams. You know, I'm not getting you guys all riled up for donos, and I appreciate still coming through with the support.
Publicly announced its plans for the next, I forget, 10 or 15 years, in which it said that the U.S. will move from control of space to ownership of space. Well, those of you who've read the National Security Strategy know what that means. We don't just control the world, we own it. And space we're going to own, which means nobody else gets near it. It's going to be used for platforms for offensive weapons, highly destructive weapons, nuclear, non-nuclear.
I do feed on your money.
Adopted a first strike doctrine. The world's under complete surveillance. You know, hypersonic drones tell you if somebody's crossing the street in, you know, Delhi or something like that. In theory, what's being worked on are systems which would enable a command post in the Colorado mountains to instantaneously attack and destroy any target in the world without warning, and they hope with impunity. Reduces the need for forward military bases, which cause various problems. People don't like them. That's, you know, sitting right there. So yes, the dimension of force is the dominant dimension, and the control over energy resources is a crucial part of this. 50 years ago, George Kennan, one of the top planners then, pointed out that control over Middle East oil gives the United States what he called veto power over, I was thinking of Japan at the time, but in fact everyone. A lot of the maneuvering in the Middle East and Central Asia, if you really look at it closely, is about, you know, the direction in which the pipelines will go and who's going to control production and transit routes. And that has to do with controlling Europe and Asia, Northeast Asia particularly, who understand it perfectly well. So they've been looking for their own independent access to energy resources all along. A lot of the maneuvering is about that. Again, in this morning's New York Times, you can read Paul Wolfowitz's memo saying that Germany and France will not be permitted to take part in what's called the reconstruction of Iraq. Well, partly that's just a reflection of the unbelievably passionate hatred of democracy by Wolfowitz and the Bush administration and others like them. I mean, they're furious at France and Germany because France and Germany, the governments took the same position as the overwhelming majority of the population, so therefore they have to be punished. The good guys like Italy and Spain, the government overruled an even larger majority of the population, so they got to be rewarded. It's kind of intriguing about the U.S. intellectual community that this can go on alongside of, you know, odes to the love of democracy of Paul Wolfowitz and so on. So part of it is just the normal hatred of democracy, but it's more than that. France and Germany are the heartland of
Hey,
Europe.
Storma. How you doing?
That's the industrial, commercial, financial heart of
It's the
Europe.
most frightening word in nuclear
and
physics.
if they get
What?
access to the Middle East, that's no good, because then they won't be under the thumb of the United States. We need that veto power. So go back to your question.
True.
Shift to renewable energy. I don't think anything would change. Who would the Palestinian leaders be with the greatest chance of negotiation success? Well, in my view, that's up to the Palestinians to decide, right? and the Palestinians have decided. I mean, when Bush made his speech about democracy that we were all supposed to worship a couple of weeks ago, it was mostly ridiculed in the Middle East and, in fact, most of the world outside of England for very simple reasons. If you look at what he said, he praised various democracies. These countries are advancing toward democracy, these are not so good, and so on. It had absolutely nothing to do with democracy. Anybody who knows about the countries knows that no correlation. But it had a very good correlation to willingness to accept U.S. orders. So if you were following U.S. orders, you were progressing toward democracy, just kind of like Italy and Spain, distinct from France and Germany. But what's striking about the Middle East is that there is one elected leader. There's one genuinely elected leader in the region, one, elected by supervised elections. Probably not perfect, but I doubt that they were worse than the 2000 elections. Who did they elect? Well, Yasser Arafat. He's the one elected leader in the region. So what does the Bush administration have to say about him? Out. That's because of our love of democracy and our grand vision about democracy. I mean, I don't like him personally. I wouldn't have voted for him, but it's not up to me.
No one has plans for the weekend.
He was elected by the Palestinians. If you want to know which leader should negotiate, well, let the Palestinians pick a leadership. They've already done it. Let them pick another one. But let them do it, not Washington, not Paul Wolfowitz or other people whose contempt for democracy goes beyond discussion. Let them do it themselves. I think there are better choices, but who am I to say? It's there for them to say. And in fact, as far as Arafat is concerned, whatever you think about him, he has, by comparison, on these issues, by comparison with American or Israeli leaders, he's been far more willing to accept a diplomatic settlement. In fact, that's been considered the problem. Ever since the mid-'70s, he's been pressing for a political settlement. When Israel invaded Lebanon in 1982 with U.S. backing again, otherwise they couldn't have done it, and killed about 20,000 people and destroyed most of the South, it had nothing to do with self-defense. They didn't even pretend that it did. It had to do with getting rid of the PLO, which was becoming Arafat, as one of Israel's leading scholar on the Palestinians put it. Very conservative guy, no doubt. Yehoshua Barat, he said that Arafat's insistence on diplomacy and negotiations are what he called a veritable catastrophe for Israel. So we got to put an end to it and return them to terror, which we like, but not negotiations, which we don't want. It was a war for the West Bank, it was called by the highest political and military echelons. Because they were pressing for a political settlement. U.S. and Israel didn't want it. So if you want somebody to negotiate for a diplomatic settlement, there's a choice. I mean, the people who the Palestinians elected, who happens to have been trying to do it for the last, since the mid-'70s. My choice? No, but it's not up to me to decide. So the comment is that since 9/11, Israel has framed its actions in the context of the war on terror. So anything it does is part of the U.S. war against terror, right? And the question is, how would that framing of the issues, how would it affect U.S. government policy? Well, actually, U.S. government policy is so, like every state, is so completely hypocritical that it doesn't make any difference. But and the U.S. is not alone in this respect. But
congratulations! You didn't facilitate the death of civilians. Hooray! You're all at the level cap.
Next will be your turn. I'll kill you by my own hands.
I swear it.
Oh no. Oh god.
There is blood on my hands. How long till it lies on my heart?
Three weeks had passed since the massacre at Balmamusa. The tragedy had been as flint to fire for the Wallister, bringing them together as never before. Indeed, it proved more than enough to inspire to action those Galgastani who bore no love for Balbatos.
1 second, chat.
Soon, the Galgastani had split into two camps, placing Hierophant Balbatos in the most precarious position. Balbatos essayed to silence the voices of dissent, but as cities began to fall to the Duke's resistance, he was obliged to retreat to the safety of his keep in Corytonai. As Galgastan faltered, more joined the Wallister resistance.
I'll be right
Soon
back,
the
chat.
rebel ranks had grown
After
to
I watch
fully
this
threefold their
cutscene.
former number. It seemed only a matter of days before Balbatos
Was that
would be
child on
brought out
fire?
before
Yes.
his own walls to answer for what he had done. As for Denham, through the Duke's scheming, he had been named a mastermind of the massacre, and a price put on his head. Resistance fighters and headhunters alike scour the high roads for him, while Denham finds temporary solace in the port town of Ashton.
Nah, DH Express.
Don't go on blaming yourself. You did all you could.
I'm feeling sick, so I'm not gonna be going outside to look at Northern Lights.
I did nothing. I couldn't save them.
Denham, what if we left this place, sailed far away and never looked back?
We've been through this. Father must be avenged. Besides, how could we leave things as they are? Now, we stay and see this through. We owe it to those who died at Balmamusa.
Birdman!
At it again, are you? Give your quibbling a rest and look at this. As the Duke grows more impatient, you grow more valuable. Up to 30,000 Goth now.
Salt in our wounds. We are criminals before all the world.
Justice and war seldom keep company. In the heat of battle, all are criminal and all are innocent. Only later does the victor decide who is which. That's the way of the world.
And since I lost, since I failed Balmamusa, I am made a criminal for it.
All the more reason to be on the winning side. Come, enough navel-gazing. We need to go.
Go? Where?
The Wallister army gathers southwest of the Burnham Massif in the Sanji Weald.
Of course. Galgastan doesn't stand a chance of repelling the resistance. Not now.
You touch it with a needle. Balbatos' days are numbered. I dare say Wallister victory is in the air.
In which case, we shall remain outlaws.
All the more reason to be on our way. Something must be done. Word reaches me that the Holy Knight Lancelot has taken up position behind the Wallister, on Tynemouth Hill to be exact. With the Wallister massed elsewhere, Tynemouth will have but light defense. What better place to break through the line?
Of course. Lancelot will aid us. I am certain.
Then we move. There's naught more to be done in this wretched place.
Okay, so they need to now escape Wallister territory because they're behind enemy lines. Gotcha.
Welcome.
Okay, I'll be right back. I need to get my pizza. It's pizza. feeds her.
But the framing, you're correct about the framing, but remember, it's not Israel. It's just about every country in the world. So Russia, for example, was carrying out vicious atrocities in Chechnya, immediately reconstructed what it was doing as part of the war on terror, figuring they'd get a pat in the head from Washington, which they did. So the U.S. now supports openly the Russian monstrous atrocities in Chechnya, and every other government in the world did approximately the same thing. Israel and the West Bank, Indonesia and Aceh, everywhere. Other governments like the United States or England, and in fact most, instituted some kind of repressive legislation to control their own populations, usually called Protection Against Terrorism Acts or Patriot Act or something like that. Had almost nothing to do with terrorism, had a lot to do with population control. So yes, the natural response of any power system, any state, to September 11th was to increase its power and repression under the pretext of defense against terror, and Israel did the same thing. But it's across the board. You have to look hard to find an exception. Is Israel defending itself against terror? Well, take a look. Every day there's an article about the separation wall, right? This wall that's snaking through the West Bank. The Security Council and the General Assembly have tried to block it. The U.S. stops it, vetoes it as usual. And the justification, it's leaving a couple 100,000 Palestinians essentially in limbo. They're deprived of their lands. They'll have to get out. Sooner or later they'll get out. One of the leading Israeli commentators, Amir Ahaz, describes it as a step towards expulsion. Probably is. It's described as needed for protection of Israel, for security. Is it? Think about it for a second. Think about it for 1 second. Suppose you wanted to build a wall to protect Israel. Where would you put it? Well, you'd put it a couple of miles inside Israel. If you put a wall a couple of miles inside the Green Line,
you've given good chase, but the hunt ends here.
You're not the first headhunter to mistake me for easy quarry.
Oh, I'll have your head. But I am no headhunter. You'll pay in blood for what you did in Balma Musa.
You were in Balma Musa. Please, you must hear me.
We are past talk. For Balma Musa! For my brother!
yeah, you could build it 100 feet high if you want. You could have the Israeli army patrolling on both sides. You could mine it with nuclear weapons. You could do anything you want, and you wouldn't get one word of international protest. And nobody could pass it. It would be an impenetrable wall. So if security is the issue, that's what you do. You don't increase security by putting a couple 100,000 Palestinians inside the wall. Well, that is so obvious that it really takes genius not to see it. Now, ask yourself if there is a single comment anywhere pointing out that this thing can't possibly be for protection of Israelis. It's impossible. That's not where you'd put it. So why not do it that way? Well, because if you do it that way, you don't steal Palestinian land. You inconvenience Israelis who'd have to go through gates instead of Palestinians who have to go through gates that are never open. So therefore it's no good. Well, that tells you what the wall is about. Okay? It has nothing to do with security, except for security for the Israeli settlements, which are illegal anyway. But so it's just a way of taking over, of advancing the U.S.-Israeli program of gradually integrating the valuable parts of the territories inside Israel, now under the pretext of security. But the pretext is so ludicrous in this case. You really have to admire the commentators who can't see it. And as far as I'm aware, that's 100%. I've never seen a word pointing out the obvious, which is obvious on a moment's reflection, that if you want a wall that's going to secure Israelis from West Bank infiltration, you put it 2 miles inside Israel.
Enough of this. We did no murder in Balmanoos.
Pretty obvious, isn't it?
We were there.
Can you think of a fallacy?
Not tonight. We did all we could to stop the slaughter.
Thanks very much, Professor Chomsky. If I could just give a plug, a lot of the sources which you quoted from recent news stories are on that website. So it's a good resource because Professor Chomsky can't be here for all of us every day. Just my one question. The Associated Press this morning, and this has been going on for a while, talked about how OPEC is thinking of changing to the euro. Is this a big deal? Or is it
It's a big deal. It's a very big deal. I mean, if you look at the international financial, discussions, the euro is sort of creeping up on the dollar in terms of value. I mean, by now, it's overvalued. But I mean, as a currency that people are willing to rely on, it's creeping up on the dollar. If you look at bonds that are issued, it used to be overwhelmingly dollar. Now it's close to 50-50 dollar-euro. And in many respects, the euro is a more stable currency, safer currency. So Europe, for example, doesn't have the huge U.S. trade deficit. It's not the case that Asia lends and Europe spends, to quote Laura Tyson. And people understand that. Sooner or later, Asia, OPEC, and others are going to start probably using a basket of currencies, not just the dollar, but a mixture, and they might shift over to the euro. The effect of that on the U.S. economy, I mean, nobody can really predict, but it could be extremely serious. The U.S. economy is a very fragile system. It's a very rich country and enormous advantages, but the way it's being handled economically is just a disaster. And the world knows it. They're willing to support it for some time, but when that'll break down, nobody knows. And the potential that OPEC might switch to, even in part, to the euro, as it might do, is serious. In fact, that's one of the reasons, I think, why the U.S. wants to ensure military control over the region, so that the facade doesn't get any funny ideas. I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave. Sorry.
Back in the day. Better times. How y'all doing? Are you guys chilling? Are you enjoying the content? I know, again, I get kind of self-conscious when I'm just like doing pure gaming content. Doing okay? Nice. Well, I figured I would pair that with this talk from Democracy Now! They assembled Rashid Khalidi, Ta-Nehisi Coates, Michelle Alexander, and Yasmin El-Rifai to talk about Palestine.
This is funded by viewers like you. Please support our work.
Yes, everyone go give and donate to Democracy Now! They do incredible work.
democracynow.org/give. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Today, a special broadcast. But we must speak on Palestine and the mandates of conscience. That was the name of a November 1st event here in New York, where leading writers and academics came together to speak out against Israel's bombardment of Gaza. The event was held at the Union Theological Seminary in Manhattan, but it almost didn't happen. 4 other venues refused to host the gathering. Over the next hour, we'll hear the words of the acclaimed writer Ta-Nehisi Coates, who won the National Book Award for his book Between the World and Me. He was in conversation with the Palestinian-American historian Rashid Khalidi, the Edward Said Professor of Modern Arab Studies at Columbia University. His books include The 100 Years' War on Palestine. Their discussion was moderated by Michelle Alexander, the renowned civil rights attorney and author. We begin with Yasmin El-Rafai, author, writer, and producer of the Palestine Festival of Literature.
Since 2008, PalFest has been bringing writers and artists from around the world to Palestine for a week-long festival, staging free public events in multiple cities across Palestine. Some of you have been our guests, participants, and advisors. As we come together in this beautiful sanctuary tonight, churches, mosques, hospitals, and refugee camps in Gaza are being bombed by Israel.
Arisel, the Thunder Goddess?
Colleagues, friends, and partners in the West Bank are living in terror for their safety and the safety of their families. The young writers in Gaza who organized a night of poetry in the besieged Strip ahead of the opening of PalFest in Ramallah last May have stopped replying to their messages. Mohammed Al-Qudwa, who contributed a poem to that evening last May, is still occasionally replying to messages and posting on Instagram. With no food, water, or power in Gaza, and amidst constant bombardment, he writes that when his phone lights up, the internet feels like a miracle. Some of the writers and activists in the West Bank whose homes PalFest visited just last May and in years prior are having their photographs and addresses circulated on chat groups among armed Israeli settlers calling for their murder.
Jesus.
Some of the publishers and editors who have worked with these writers and artists and activists are in this room today. In response to this disaster, we are holding this event as an urgent intervention by writers, scholars, and poets who have looked at the unavoidable
getting fancy over there, Neuron.
Politics, who have thought deeply about land, segregation, colonization, history, and liberation. We thank the Union Theological Seminary for taking us in at a time when events in this city are being canceled and censored. This is the 5th space we approached to host us this evening. The difficulty is not because of availability.
That was Yasmin El-Rafai of the Palestine Festival of Literature, speaking at an event at the Union Theological Seminary here in New York. It was titled, "But We Must Speak on Palestine and the Mandates of Conscience." This is civil rights attorney Michelle Alexander, renowned author of the book, The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness. About 5 years ago, Alexander wrote a widely read op-ed piece for the New York Times headlined, "Time to Break the Silence on Palestine."
The fact that so many people are here tonight, so many, from all different religions, races, genders, is itself a testament of hope. I know that so many of us are carrying a great deal of grief, fear, anger, internal conflict, and despair into this room. I hope that we can breathe together now that we have arrived. Exhale, open our hearts to one another, and listen deeply to each other. We are here. We are many. We are not alone. On behalf of Serene Jones, the president of Union Theological Seminary, I want to welcome you to James Chapel. Serene could not join us tonight because she has a commitment in Washington, D.C., but she wishes she could be here, and she extends a very warm welcome to all of you. It's no secret that many people are closing their doors to these kinds of vital conversations right now. fearful of what others might say, think, or do in response. And so I am enormously grateful that Serene said yes when I asked her if the Palestine Literary Festival could come to Union and use this sacred space. She said yes, knowing that her decision might invite criticism or rebuke, but she also knew that James Chapel has been the site of many, many difficult, courageous conversations, dialogues that are essential to our collective liberation and the creation of beloved community. In fact, it was in this very space that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was originally scheduled to deliver his 1967 speech condemning the Vietnam War. The event was ultimately relocated to Riverside Church across the street due to the overwhelming number of people who wanted to hear what he had to say and our space limitations here. At Riverside, Dr. King stepped to the podium and said, quote, "I come to this magnificent house of worship tonight because my conscience leaves me no other choice. A time comes when silence is betrayal, and that time has come for us in relation to Vietnam." Dr. King acknowledged how difficult it can be for people to speak out against their own government, especially in times of war, and that the temptations of conformity may lead us toward a paralyzed apathy. He did not deny that the issues present in Vietnam were complex, with long histories, and he recognized that there were ambiguities and that North Vietnam and the National Liberation Front were not paragons of virtue. But he said that he was morally obligated to speak for the suffering and helpless and outcast children of Vietnam. He said, quote, "This I believe to be the privilege and the burden of all of us who deem ourselves bound by allegiances and loyalties which are broader and deeper than nationalism and which go beyond our nation's self-defined goals and positions. We are called to speak for the weak, for the voiceless, for the victims of our nation, and for those it calls enemy. For no document from human hands can make these humans any less our brothers," end quote. He condemned the Vietnam War in unsparing terms. He decried the moral bankruptcy of a nation that does not hesitate to invest in bombs and warfare around the world, but can never seem to find the dollars to eradicate poverty at home. He called for a radical revolution of values. He said, quote, "We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. When machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered," end quote. Dr. King was condemned by virtually every major media outlet in America for taking this stand, and even within the civil rights community, many imagined that he was a traitor to the cause. And yet we now know, deep within us, we know that he was right. He is right. He is right today as he was back then about the corrupting forces of capitalism, militarism, and racism, and how they lead inexorably toward war. And he was right that our conscience must leave us no other choice. We must speak when the oppressed, the poor, the weak are under attack, when their homes are stolen or demolished, when they are forced to migrate and to live in unspeakable conditions, in open-air prisons, concentration camps, perpetually as refugees under occupation. We must speak. We must speak when Jewish children are brutally killed in the name of liberation, when anti-Semitism and Islamophobia slip in through the back door of supposedly progressive spaces, when Palestinian children in refugee camps are bombed and killed, when schools and hospitals and entire neighborhoods are laid waste. We must speak. When international law is treated like a naive suggestion, we must speak. Yes, it may be difficult. Yes, we will make mistakes. We are human. And yes, we may be afraid, but we must speak. Countless lives and the liberation of all of us depend on us breaking our silences. And what's required in these times, as I see it, is not only activism and politics, but also deeply personal spiritual work, As Grace Lee Boggs once said, quote, "These are the times to grow our souls." All of us have a conscience that whispers to us, sometimes in the dark. The mandates of conscience that arise within each of us arise not out of loyalty to abstract principles or doctrines, but from a place of deep knowing. A deep knowing that we owe something to each other as human beings, that we belong to each other, and that our freedom and liberation depends on one another. If I do not stand and speak up when the bombs are raining down...
Way too many streaming windows. There's just me, the game, and this. That's 3. That's fine. You guys can keep up with that.
...on you, then who will speak up for me, for my loved ones when the tables are turned? As James Baldwin wrote to Angela Davis more than 50 years ago when she sat in a prison cell. For if they take you in the morning, they will be coming for us that night.
Civil rights attorney and author Michelle Alexander, speaking at a November 1st event at the Union Theological Seminary here in New York, organized by the Palestine Festival of Literature. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In this special broadcast, we're airing excerpts of a recent event organized by the Palestine Festival of Literature at the Union Theological Seminary here in New York. It featured a discussion between the acclaimed writer
Storma.
Ta-Nehisi
All right.
Coates and Columbia University professor Rashid Khalidi. Coates won the National Book Award for his book Between the World and Me. His other books.
Wait, I want the actual talk here.
100 Years War on Palestine.
That it was possible to put this together. This is the second Palestine Festival of Literature event that has been canceled and canceled again, and the heroic organizers managed to pull it together. They did the same thing in London, where I was supposed to speak last Friday, and it was canceled and canceled again. In London, they sent the anti-terrorism police to the Royal Geographic Society and told them they could not hold the event, but they held it anyway. My connection to Palestine is obviously a personal one. My family is from there. I have family there now. My niece's family is actually in Gaza.
Hey, Metal Kitty Mom.
They live in Riman, which is a neighborhood of Gaza right near the sea.
Metro Miss.
We're not far from the sea. They fled from their home under bombardment to the southern part of Gaza. They were being bombarded there, and so they went back to the shelter of their home. And then just yesterday, because they were warned that the neighborhood would be bombed, they moved to the Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza, which is, like all hospitals in Gaza, threatened by the Israeli military with being bombed. So that's part of my connection, and I have family in other places there. I was there last in March, and it was obvious that the situation was on the point of exploding. One has to be there to see
check that out,
how
Paladin.
awful occupation and dispossession and decades of living as people have had to live, whether in refugee camps or in other parts of occupied Palestine, whether they're
I'm in both
Palestinian
chats.
citizens living as
That's
fifth-class
because
citizens in Israel, whether they're in the Gaza Strip.
You're all good. You're all good
in
eggs.
the West Bank, whether they're in Jerusalem. I should say that my wish is that every single one of you has a chance to go there. People who have been there have found it a transformative experience. You actually cannot believe what settler colonialism is like. You cannot believe that in the 21st century this is being done to an entire people unless you see it. You can read about it, you can understand it theoretically, but you have to see it. And I urge those of you who have the opportunity to please try and go there.
Yeah, I want to pick up on where Rashid left off. I went with PalFest. Yasmin, Omar, and all the organizers of PalFest hosted me. And I was there for 5 days in occupied territories in Jerusalem, and then I stayed another 5 days after that. And I had this degree of anxiety about going. Because I knew I was going to see something I couldn't quite name. And I knew because of my upbringing, because of my mother, because of my father, because of my wife, because of my son, because of my community, that after I saw the thing, I would have to come back and talk about it. That there was no option in which I did not talk about it. And I thought I was going to another country. But in fact, what amazed me was I actually felt that I was in the same country. But I was in a different time. I was in the time of my parents and my grandparents. I can think back to all of the articles I've read, all the things I've seen said about how complicated and how complex the situation is and the occupation is. I say it's complex, it's complicated. And it's made to sound as though you need a degree in Middle Eastern studies or some such, a PhD, to really understand what's happening. But I understood the first day. We went to East Jerusalem to try to visit in the way that Muslims visit to Al-Aqsa Mosque. And I can remember being there, and there were 4 IDF guards, biggest guns I'd ever seen in my life. And they checked IDs, and they gave us our IDs back. And then they did nothing. They just made us wait. And we waited, and we waited, and we waited. There was no list, there was no protocol, there was no anything. They were just making us wait because they could. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I was like, I know what this is. I know exactly what this is. The second day we went to Hebron, and I can remember walking down streets with a Palestinian guide. And we would get to certain streets, and he would say, I can't walk down this street with you. You can walk, I cannot, because I'm Palestinian. And I thought, I know what that is. As we drove through the occupied territories, and I would look out, and I would see roads that Palestinians could use, and roads that only Israeli Jews could use. I said, I know what this is. As I saw different colored license plates for different classes of people, I said, I know what this is. As I saw communities that I can only describe as segregated, I said, this is Chicago, it's Baltimore, it's Philadelphia. And I don't mean to center the whole world on America. We have a tendency to do that, but my lens is my lens. This is all I have. And what I felt was a tremendous weight. I felt the obvious thing that I think all of us feel, that our tax dollars are effectively subsidizing apartheid, or subsidizing a segregationist order, a Jim Crow regime. But I also felt that as an African American who was reared on the fight against Jim Crow, against white supremacy, against apartheid, I felt tremendous shame. How could I not know? How could I not know that the only democracy in the Middle East as it builds itself is segregated? How did I not know that? And what I came to, Michelle, was that Israel is a democracy, the only democracy in the Middle East, in the exact same way that America is the oldest democracy in the world. So the relationship was quite clear. It was quite clear, it was palpable, it was felt, and the responsibility was clear after that.
So let's take a step back and talk a little bit about the history. Both of you have written a lot about the importance of understanding history in order to engage meaningfully with our present. Both of you have talked about history as ongoing processes rather than as complete, finished, and in the past. And you've written that there was no isolated event, the Nakba, that began and ended in 1948.
1948, but rather a 100 Years' War on Palestine. And so I'm wondering if you could share with us what you think people need to know, need to understand about the history of Palestine in order to act in meaningful and courageous ways now. And also, what do they need to know about the history of Palestinian resistance, since it is so often portrayed in the media in such an ahistorical fashion, as though Palestinian resistance is driven by hate rather than by a natural, unquenchable yearning to be free. And so share with us what we need to know in your view.
Thanks, Michelle. What we need to know, all of us, is more about the history. What we need to know is, I think, summed up in the title of the book that you just mentioned. This is part of a 100 Years' War on Palestine. It's not a war in Palestine. It's a war to implant a settler colonial presence at the expense of an indigenous people, which is being pushed out slowly but surely.
True.
And when we say the Nakba, the disaster,
this guy is correct.
We start by talking about what happened in 1948. But that's part of a much longer process.
Can you explain what happened in 1948?
I will. In 1948, 750,000 Palestinians were driven from their homes, starting months before the State of Israel was created, including 70,000 people in Jaffa, 70,000 people in Haifa, two of the largest Arab cities in Palestine, 30,000 people in Jerusalem. All of this before Israel was even created. And then, once Israel was created, once the war between Israel and the Arab states started, hundreds of thousands of more were driven out. That was not a result of war. That was part of a settler colonial process which dictates that you must eliminate, reduce, push out the indigenous population in order to replace it with settlers. That is what Israel is. Israel is a national fact, but it is also a settler colonial fact. It is a fact very similar to the facts that were created in Ireland by settlers sent over by to push the indigenous population to the west of Ireland. Settlers brought to this country to push the indigenous population west and out of the land that white colonists wanted to settle. It's different, but it's different in its specifics, but it's exactly the same process. And the war is not one between equals. It is a war between an indigenous population and an externally supported, powerful movement rooted always in Western Europe and the United States. This is the metropole for that project. This is where that project gets its money, its guns, its vetoes in the Security Council. Without that, we wouldn't be where we are. Without the Balfour Declaration, without the British and the French, without the United States. And I think it's really, really important to understand all of these facts, that this has been a process which is driven by a demographic imperative to create a Jewish majority in a country which until 1948 had an overwhelming Arab majority, to create a Jewish state, which was the objective of Zionism. In an overwhelmingly Arab land, you had to reduce the Arab population. And in order to do that, you had ultimately to use force. That's what the Nakba starts with, force. Hundreds of thousands more are pushed out after the 1967 war. And in the interim, there's constant pressure on Palestinians to leave. Permits are revoked, residencies are revoked. You're not allowed to enter. You're not allowed to retain this citizenship or to live here. All of it designed to squeeze the population either out of the country or into smaller and smaller spaces. You can call them Area A, Area B, Area C. You can call them Bantustans. You can call them Native American reservations. It's the same thing. It's the same process. It's the same logic. It's the same racism. And I guess the last thing I'd say about the history is that in this unequal struggle, which involves unremitting violence one of the first leaders of the Zionist movement, a man named Zev Jabotinsky, the spiritual father of every government since Yitzhak Shamir's government. He said it. We need an iron wall. We need force, or we cannot do this. Every native population resists its dispossession. That's not me. That's Jabotinsky. And he said it again and again and again. And that is what has produced Palestinian resistance. Unremitting violence. You cannot have dispossession. You cannot have people's homes and property taken away without the use of violence. You cannot force 750,000 people from their homes without violence. And that is what the Palestinians have suffered in this war. And they've resisted. Sometimes they've been successful, sometimes they've been unsuccessful. Sometimes that resistance was political or nonviolent. Quite frequently it was violent. Violence inevitably breeds violence. And every time the Palestinians have tried to resist nonviolently, the response was almost more ferocious than violent resistance. Why? Because if boycott, divestment, and sanctions, or action before the International Criminal Court, or the Great March of Return in Gaza a couple of years ago, when Israeli snipers shot down hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of unarmed demonstrators, if those things can succeed, then Israel is naked in a way that it's not when the resistance is violent. So when you ask why do you have violent resistance, you have violent resistance both because in order to impose a separate colonial reality,
Charlie, that sounds delicious.
Unremitting, unceasing violence has been applied to them, and because finally people can only take so much. People can only take so much. And so I think that in order to understand this, and in order to advocate effectively for this cause, it's really necessary for us to understand all of these things, to understand the legal aspects, the kind of things that Noor Arikat has written about, to understand details about the politics, the kinds of things that many other people have written about, and to understand the history. This has been portrayed by a movement that is political, that is national. I'm talking about Zionism, that is economic, that is military, but is also a public relations project. It has sold a picture, what you were talking about, Ta-Nehisi, which people have swallowed with their mother's milk. And it is necessary to deconstruct that, and the only way to do that is to know better than they do the reality of what has been happening in Palestine for more than 100 years.
So Ta-Nehisi, you can respond to that, but also I'm especially interested in your thoughts about the history of Black solidarity with the Palestinian struggle and kind of the extent to which you think it's vital for Black people to be in solidarity with Palestine and the struggle to free Palestine today.
Yeah, well, I'll say a couple things. I think it's really important to acknowledge something. And that is that, I'm a relative latecomer to this. It's not something that I had a real knowledge of. I had an intuition for it, I had an awareness of the tradition, but it really was not until I went there that I had a tactile feeling for it. One of the things I will probably be making amends for, until the day they put me in the ground, if I'm honest, is in one of my most celebrated works of journalism, when I had to demonstrate tangibly how a reparations program could be done. I looked to Israel. And I think about that. And one of my golden rules about writing is that, you only write after you've reported, you only write after, and I wrote without going. And so, while there is this long tradition of solidarity, for me personally, there's a thing of making amends. And it is terribly, ferociously important to me. I think about that, and I think about how gracious people were when I was over there. I think about how they took me into their homes. I think about how they fed me. And I think about how their only request was, when you go back, don't lose your voice. That was all they asked. That was all they asked. And so for me, I am obviously aware of the tradition. But this is like personal. You know what I mean? Like I have some debts to pay. You know? And I think like it's really, really important that I be clear about that.
We'll return to this conversation between the acclaimed writer Ta-Nehisi Coates and Columbia University professor Rashid Khalidi in a minute. They were speaking at a November 1st event organized by the Palestine Festival of Literature at Union Theological Seminary here in New York. The discussion moderated by the civil rights attorney and author Michelle Alexander. This is Democracy Now!,
Let's go. Let's finish the talk.
Late to my awareness as well. I had heard things, including one time from a friend, a good friend who is not prone to hyperbole, who went to Palestine, returned, and said, you know, I was active in the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa and had been to South Africa many times. Says, but what I saw in Israel and Palestine was worse than what I had seen there. And I remember filing that fact away somewhere, what he said. But imagine that the work that I was doing at home was what was most deserving of my attention. And it wasn't until the Ferguson uprisings when I began to hear that activists on the street who were facing tear gas and tanks, they were getting advice from Palestinians halfway across the globe, tweeting to them about how to deal with militaristic occupation and attacks, and following the experience that those activists had in Ferguson. Many of them went to Palestine and came back with stories and deep knowledge of the history. And as I began to learn more, I also came to learn that the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was staunchly in support of the Palestinian cause, that Muhammad Ali had identified himself as strongly in support of the Palestinian cause, that there was a long tradition of, you know, black activists standing in solidarity with Palestinians. And I have to give a shout out to my sister's new book. She's a historian. She just published a book called Fear of a Black Republic. It's about Haiti and the rise and the birth of black internationalism in the United States. But it is that long history of black people understanding that their struggle for liberation crosses boundaries and that solidarity is necessary across those boundaries, I think, is calling to us now. And the fact that Palestinians were supporting folks in the street of Ferguson, and who also, I've heard, were showing their support for people in Flint, Michigan, giving advice about how to survive when your water's shut off. And so it's encouraging to me to hear about that kind of international solidarity in this time. But let's turn to some political realities in the United States right now. The United States support, as we all know, for Israel has been absolutely unwavering for decades, even among supposedly progressive politicians and elected officials. Mark Lamont Hill and Mitchell Plichnik have written an excellent book called Except for Palestine, The Limits of Progressive Politics. And I'd love to hear from both of you a little bit about these political realities in the United States right now. We are witnessing in real time exactly how unshakable the support is for Israel as the Biden administration refuses to draw any lines in the sand or place any limitations at all on the billions of dollars of aid that we send to Israel
every year, even as it commits horrific war crimes broadcast around the globe. Why is our government not only tolerating this, but sending billions more dollars to Israel? And before you answer, I want to note that I think a clue can be found in a speech that a young U.S. Senator named Joe Biden delivered on the Senate floor in June 1986. It's available on YouTube. He said defiantly, quote, "If we look at the Middle East, I think it's about time we stop apologizing for our support for Israel. There is no apology to be made, none. It is the best $3 billion investment we make. Were there not in Israel, the United States of America would have to invent in Israel to protect our interests in the region. The United States would have to go out and invent in Israel," end quote. So, what was Biden saying exactly? What do we need to understand about U.S. support for Israel?
Hot potato, eh? I think we need to understand a bunch of things. We need to understand that there's a strategic thing there, serves American imperial interests, has always done. That's why the British started this project. They did not do it for the brown eyes of the Jewish people. They did it because it was in the strategic interests of the British Empire. And that's one reason the United States does it. We do not give $3.8 billion a year plus the $10 billion that Biden's asked for additionally this year for anything to do with sentiment. It has to do with strategy, it has to do with oil, it has to do with interests, imperial interests. It has to do with a couple other things. It does have to do with the evangelical right. That's one of the things that moved Britain to support the Balfour Declaration, to support a Jewish national home in an almost entirely Arab country. And it's one of the things that moves American politicians. The votes, the money, the concentrated political power of the evangelical right. It has to do with money. Our politicians are whores. They're bought and sold. That needs to be said. And the bigger the donor, the more services they get. And that's part of it. And if we ask, why is it that our media is so complicit? Well, it's partly because our media is a echo chamber for the people in power in Washington. I read the New York Times some mornings and I say the New York Pravda Times. And I read the Washington Post, I read the Washington Izvestia Post. They are like the Soviet press during the Cold War. They are, whether it's the Ukraine war or whether it's this war, they echo power. But they also echo money. Who owns the Washington Post? Jeff Bezos. Who owns MSNBC, NBC Universal? Who owns those institutions of the press? The same people who own the politicians. The same people who own our universities. Who runs our universities? Who runs our universities? Not the presidents and the deans and the department chairmen and women.
And we don't. Why
it's
are
the board of
trustees. So
trustees. What is the board of trustees?
3 words, or 4 words. Middle Eastern military base.
It's the same people who finance the politicians, same people who own the media. So if we see a compliant media with a government that is supportive of Israel because of votes, because of the evangelical right, because of imperial strategic objectives, it's very simple. When we see university administrations kowtowing to one narrative on Palestine, as they have done right across the country, it's for the same reason that our media does it, and the same reason that our government does it. It's money, it's power. It's very, very, very simple. I can give you a more sophisticated explanation, but I think that really sums it up, frankly.
better answer than that.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because I reflect on the fact that...
Can I say something? I hope I did not insult sex workers. I did not mean to do that. I did not mean to do that.
I'm offended.
I'm very sorry. They're far above politicians. Sorry. I had to say that.
Well, I think we should probably spend a minute talking about censorship. Fear and censorship. I know that both of you have significant experience with censorship. Having your work censored, I do too.
Hey, Gamer G. We're looking at a talk Democracy Now! Helped host with a bunch of people talking about Palestine in more depth.
In recent years, the censorship of books labeled critical race theory has turned out to be a very broad category. Books about LGBTQ people and issues, kind of the scope of censorship keeps broadening, but we are seeing now kind of new forms or very old forms of being born again of censorship in this kind of war context. And I do worry about the possibility of us entering into another McCarthyite era. The challenges of finding a site just for this conversation, I think speak the real risk of that. And I wonder if both of you, and I'll start with you, say a little bit about where you think we are right now in terms of censorship. And as was mentioned earlier, people have real fears that are grounded, you know, in reality. The possibility of losing jobs, of retaliation, and even being attacked violently or killed as a result of expressing their views. Where are we now in terms of censorship? What do you fear? And how do you think people ought to respond in this moment in time?
You know, oddly enough, I think we're in a great place. And I don't say that blithely. I say that, as you mentioned, having some very, very direct experience with my own work being banned in schools and libraries. And then this week, helping where I could, and ultimately, you know, it was you, Michelle, but trying to, you know, figure out where we could hold this event and seeing, you know, Yasmin go through all of the, you know, hoops. So what I've gleaned from that is when people start resorting to instruments as blunt and direct as book bans or not allowing discussions, they're threatened. It's the weapon of a weak and a decaying order. Yeah, I'll just tell you a little story. I never forget, I came back, right? I come back from Palestine, it's like, you know, late May, and I'm going crazy. Like, I'm going to sleep, and I'm, you know, dreaming about Palestine, and I'm, you know, waking up, and I got that glassy-eyed look in my face, and my wife's worried about me, and everybody's worried about me. And I emailed a friend, and I said, do you have a contact with Rashid Khalidi at all? And he said, yeah, I do. And he connected us, and I wrote him, I said, listen, man, you don't know me from Adam, but I gotta talk to somebody about what I saw. And he said, it's okay. He said, look, I'm having a dinner this weekend, why don't you and your wife come? And I came, and we sat in community, and it was the thing that I needed. And among the many things that she said that night, he said, I have been fighting this fight for a long time, and I've never seen our side this strong. I've never seen the students at the university so galvanized. I've never, and you can confuse the ferociousness of the pushback with strength. You know what I mean? But the fact of the matter is, in African American history, for instance, here in our struggle, the struggle is the most violent when people are the most threatened. The original and the oldest and the most lethal form of domestic terrorism was pioneered after the Civil War. And what it was in response to the fact that suddenly you had multiple states throughout this country with black majorities. You had a majority black legislature in South Carolina. The pushback had to be ferocious. It had to be violent. It needed to be because of the sheer strength of the threat. That's generally been our history. And so now in this moment, when I look out and I see, not just my work band, but I see the work of my colleagues' band, I see, as you mentioned, LGBTQ authors' band. When I situate myself within the history of black writing, and I understand the fact that there was never any safe moment for black writing in this country's history. When I understand that when Frederick Douglass publishes his narrative and he goes and he talks about it, he has a price on it. So he can be dragged back into slavery at any moment. When I understand that Ida B. Wells was driven out of Memphis, Tennessee for reporting on the lynching and the murder of her friends, and she continued to report on it nonetheless. When I understand that Elijah Lovejoy was shot to death and his press was shoved into the river, you have to be realistic about this moment. What happened to you, man? You had to find another location for your talk tonight. That was it. Actually quite simple compared to the long history of things. My wife was kind enough to send me an article about this district where they had banned Between the World and Me, right? And this is a deep red district, and there'd been this whole fight about it. And they went and they interviewed the library. And the librarian said, "This is the most checked out book we've ever had." That's not because of me, that's because of the band. You understand what I'm saying? And so, like, the very fact that you guys are here, the very unfortunate fact that some of you who are watching this couldn't get in, you know what I mean? The fact that we had to struggle to find a venue for this event doesn't say anything about the strength of this movement here. It doesn't say anything about our strength. It says a lot about the threat and what people feel and the weakness. So, I don't know. I like...
I do like listening to him talk. Ta-Nehisi Coates is...
Anybody that knows me knows that I am not one known for my optimism.
Fun guy to listen
but
to
I feel
speak.
it in this moment. I really do.
I mean, I don't have much to say after that. But I'm completely convinced that Ta-Nehisi's right. The first thing is this idea that the international community supports what Israel is doing acts as if the United States, Western Europe, and a few white settler colonies in Japan are the international community. They aren't. They're a pimple on the backside of humanity. The international community is India and China, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Pakistan, Congo, Nigeria, Brazil. I could go on. Those are the people who voted in the United Nations for a ceasefire. 120 countries. There were 14. There were 14 that voted against. 6 island nations, the United States, Israel, and a bunch of hangers-on. That's not the world. The world is actually with us. Indeed, in this country. The press, no. The politicians, no. The universities, certainly no. And by that I mean the administrations. But look at the campus that I teach on. 5 years ago, Columbia students voted overwhelmingly in support of boycott, divestment, and sanctions of companies that support the occupation. Overwhelmingly. Same thing happened at Brown. Same thing happened at Barnard. Same thing happened at Michigan. Same thing happened at almost every university where the thing was put to a vote. The students are with us. By a vote, we know that. I was on the television the other day for my sins. It's a terrible thing to go on television. I promise you, don't do it if you don't have to. And I mentioned that young people are with us. And God bless her, the interviewer said to me, yeah, there's a poll here that says on Biden's handling of the Gaza situation, in the age group from 18 to 35, he has 10% support. 10%!
That is pretty crazy.
I could give you.
Like it never used to be that.
Give you more polls.
That low, you know.
They are terrified of us. That's why we're getting censorship.
We've got to close now, and you know, I think as we sit here, as in the center of the most powerful empire in the world, we need to think about what our responsibility is, as King said in the speech, to those who have been defined as our enemy, and consider not just like what we must say, but what we must do. And I'm wondering if you have thoughts that you want to share.
I do. Thank you. One of the things that I argue in this book that you mentioned is this is not a war on the Palestinians waged by the Zionist movement or Israel alone. It's a war waged on the Palestinian people by Israel and the United States. Those are our weapons. Those are American F-35s, American F-15s, American F-16s, American 175 millimeter guns, American 155 millimeter guns. They fire shells of 100 pounds each. I could tell you their kill radius. I could tell you how large the diameter of a 2,000-pound bomb dropped from an American plane is. That's us, our tax dollars, our votes. We must oppose with action, with words, not just weapons that we send to Israel to kill people with, being used in that way. Incidentally, in violation of U.S. law. U.S. law mandates that weapons can only be used for defensive purposes. Why do you think they keep saying in every one of their statements that Israel has a right to defend itself? Because otherwise, they would be in violation of U.S. law in sending those weapons to Israel. If killing children in Jabalia camp is a defensive purpose, then it's legal. And if it's not, they're in violation of the law. We must oppose that, and we must oppose the possibility of the United States being complicit in ethnic cleansing. We must oppose it as strongly as we can. Otherwise, we are the ethnic cleansers, and we are the killers. We may not be the ones pulling the trigger, we may not be the people forcing people out into Egypt or into Jordan, but we are responsible. Our government has just said that it's willing to fund that. Now, maybe they'll pull back on it, but they'll only pull back on it if we make them stop. Thank you.
That was Columbia University professor Rashid Khalidi in conversation with the acclaimed writer Ta-Nehisi Coates at a November 1st event organized by the Palestine Festival of Literature at Union Theological Seminary here in New York. The discussion was moderated by the civil rights attorney and author Michelle Alexander. Democracy Now! Is produced with Mike Burke, Renee Feltz, Dina Guzder, Messiah Rhodes, Nermeen Sheikh, Maria Terracena, Tammy Warrenoff, Tarina Nadura, Sam Alkoff, Tamari Astuj.
That was great. Oh, I like that. I like that towards the end they instilled a little bit more optimism. You know, I feel like I feel the temptation to doomer, you know, but it's good to know that maybe optimism isn't so silly, you know. God bless Amy Goodman. gonna take a little bit of a break from that. Camera froze? No! I was supposed to have fixed that issue. Why? It always freezes when I look ugly, too. Wait, let me check something real quick. It shouldn't be freezing. I'm sorry. Oh, thanks, Maxie, and I appreciate it. I feel very not good about myself when I get sick. There, you know what? I do also like listening to Vosh, and the only way I can actually stand learning anything about Slavoj Žižek is when Vosh talks about him. So, here we go. I apologize.
Is that Slavoj goddamn Žižek? I've heard rumors of this guy.
Am I going to steal content? Maybe. JK. We're doing a Segi.
Somebody linked this and said his stance on trans people confuses them. I've seen this.
This is what brings me satisfaction. And here, I think, what is prohibited today, there is another problem with woke and trans ideology. Again, as for the trans rights and so on, I'm all for it, not hypocritically. But did you notice how...
oh, you had to talk with the Cosmic
most
Skeptic, I
of
think?
the trans people who attack cisgender and so on and whoever doubts them, I'm not bluffing here, I read many texts on it.
What's that accent? This is a Slavoj Žižek accent. He's, what,
yeah, Vosh is
Slovakian?
cute.
Slovenian? I always forget which one. I've heard other people of that ethnicity. Slovenian. I've heard other Slovenian people speak, and they don't sound quite like him. Part of it is the accent, part of it is that he has a nervous tick, part of it is that he always has a gallon of phlegm in his throat. It's a him accent. It's kind of like how Arnold Schwarzenegger has an incredibly distinct accent, and it sounds kind of like an Austrian accent, but it's mostly just a Schwarzenegger accent.
By them, by extreme trans advocates, their ultimate argument is not some positive argument, but it's always, I may be biologically, measure me a man or whatever, a woman, but I don't feel to be that. It's reference to some sense of identity and...
Yeah, he's never been that great on trans issues. I feel like the more I go over this, the more like obvious and straightforward it seems, and the more I'm confused by other people's confusion by it, if that makes any sense. Again, like in this like war against conceptual identity or whatever, I have to remind everyone that I know quite a few trans people, and I have never met any of them who genuinely, sincerely doubt or deny anything objectively biological about their bodies. Occasionally, you'll find a trans chick who, when very horny, will be like, yo, rail my and she means like her ass or whatever.
Yeah.
But when she says that,
Whomst amongst
she's horny,
us?
she doesn't literally, she's not making an explicit biological argument. You know, there, like she, like that's there's not like a case of the world. It's not like a descriptive claim. You know, you don't answer like, what do you mean by that? You just f them, like that's fine. You know, just have sex. I just the biological.
No. When I ask to be railed in the ass, I want someone to argue the semantics with me. That's the sexiest thing.
Claims that are made are just they're not even on the table with regards to contesting. The only thing that I hear that people argue about is like, do hormones change your sex? Which Yeah, they do. That's the point. Your sex is a collection. Your sex is a sort of simplified interpretation of a multitude of biological sexual characteristics. Many people do not fully align with, like, it's not just intersex people, but like they were the most obvious example, where you can have people who are like 99.9% biologically female, but then like weirdly they have like a Y chromosome, like a male would. And in those cases, usually we just call them female, because if functionally speaking, everything about them, from the pussy to the ability to birth children, is female, it's like, oh, okay, well, female. So if hormones change your sex characteristics, they are very literally changing your sex. That's not some like fancy pantsy like college, like postmodern interpretation. That's not an identity-based thing or anything. That's just a fact about how sex works. That's what hormones are, So leaving the biological claims aside, Zizek here claims with some, I guess, incredulousness, like, it seems to be an identity thing, which, yeah, that's gender. That's the whole point. There's sex and there's gender. But let's see where he's going with this, I guess.
The crucial point is that, as far as I know, you are prohibited to analyze this sense of identity, to explain it. And here I think psychoanalysis helps.
I actually don't disagree. I think the problem, so okay, first of all, the idea that there is any value or utility in critically analyzing another person's identity kind of seems strange to me. There are lots of identity qualifiers that don't really get examined that much because we understand they're broad and social. What does it mean, for example, to be, like, cool? What does it mean to be American? Like, there's American citizenship, sure, but American citizenship as a concept hasn't always existed. What if the state fell tomorrow? Would somebody then no longer be American because the concept of American statehood no longer exists? Is it purely an ethnicity then? Do you mean nationality or ethnicity? Like what? What about a person who's born to American parents but outside American territory, who speaks American English and knows American culture but only arrives in America at 18 as an immigrant? Are they American? Like, so how much do you critically examine this? The truth is, you can if you want to, but how often do people actually, do that? The problem with critically examining trans identity is that nobody does so in good faith. If you want to sit down and, like, talk to a trans person to try to critically engage with why they say they're a woman or whatever, you can. It's not necessarily even bad to, but overwhelmingly when this conversation is had, it's done in extraordinarily bad faith. Conservatives don't want to critically examine a trans woman's claims that she's a woman. They just want to deny, like, just offhandedly without any thought or introspection. It's anti-intellectual. It's like, no, you're not. You have a penis. No, you're not. Like, there's no thought there. But if you want to, like, actually have a conversation, you can. I don't find the conversation very interesting because I don't give a shit what gender people are. But I've had a few trans friends who have kind of, like, talked about why they've felt why they are the way they are when they transition or just when talking to me. And this is a conversation that I must repeat this, find of middling interest, because I truly don't give a shit outside of the fact that I'm their friend and I support them. But, everyone has their own reasoning, in the same way that you could have a bunch of different forms of reasoning with regards to, like, why somebody is an American, right? Like you could have a bunch of different arguments, and, like, some arguments maybe sound a little bit more tenuous, and some of them sound a little bit more concrete. Some arguments sound better than others, I guess, but there's not really, like, an objective standard by which you can determine whether or not any of those arguments is correct. I hate to go back to this really played out example, but it's played out for a good reason. It would be like making an argument for what is or isn't a chair, The only definition of a chair that's comprehensive and correct is a chair is anything which we refer to as a chair. But there's not much utility to that definition. The best definition that I could really think of is a chair is something that is meant to be sat upon, shrug. And then you'd be like, well, what about this? And then you shrug harder. Like, oh, well, what about this? Shrug, 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 shrug. Oh, well, what about what about this horse? What about a bench? What about a shrug, 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 shrug. Like, I think that's kind of the best that you can get, Because that's how definitions are. Anyone who thinks you can arrive at some kind of perfect objective definition that conclusively determines with no problems whatsoever everything that is defined as that thing, you're delusional. It's never going to happen. So you can make good or bad arguments for what is or isn't a chair, I guess. But at the end of the day, I guess the conversation just isn't that interesting to me. Is anyone's life really affected by a super strenuous examining of what the word chair means or refers to? Am I affected by a super strenuous examination of what a specific trans person means when they say they're a certain gender? I guess I just don't really care, and I don't actually think there's much utility to it. You can engage with it if you want to. I'm not saying it's bad to. Hell, you can even critically engage with it if you want to. A good example of this that I've done would be and I've said this before and I'll say it again, I'm still shaky on the xenogender thing. I don't think they're objectively wrong, but I like the idea, and I think there's more utility in the idea of gender being an identity that is tied in some way to our cultural understanding of sex. So man and woman are tied to male and female. So you could say that man and woman are social identities that are tied to those underlying biological states that humans tend to fall into. But then if you start getting to xenogender territory, you start getting like, well, people now have identities that are tied to something else entirely. And then it just seems like you're describing identity, not gender. But at the same time, that's my critical engagement. But do I really care? Like, do I know people who are xenogender who I'm chill with? Like, yeah, okay. Does that make sense? Does everyone understand this rambling? Isn't the point of gender abolitionism to decouple identity from sex? Well, the point of gender abolitionism is to just not have, like, gender identity, which would be that, yeah. But that would just mean then that people wouldn't have genders, they would have identities, which means they wouldn't really be xenogenders, they'd be just identities, or aesthetics, or vibes, or whatever. I don't want to get into it.
Because in this debate, psychoanalysis is absolutely not on the side of biology. The paradox of psychoanalysis, I already hinted it, is that yes, we have, of course, our sexuality has certain biological roots and so on, but even with so-called normal cis persons, the passage is not smooth. It's not that I am a man and then I'm too lazy to deconstruct myself through trans procedures and so on, so I simply accept that I'm a man. No. From being biologically a man, in the brutal sense of my biological identity, penis, testicles, and so on, to becoming a man in the symbolic sense, and that's the point of psychoanalysis, it's a long and painful process with many cuts, brutal changes, shifts, and so on and so on.
I think I understand what he's saying here. He's basically saying that, like, even if your argument is that you're a man because of your biology, the process of becoming a man in a social sense is like this grueling social like, if being a man was truly just biological, you wouldn't need to learn how to be one. You would simply be born with a penis and big flappy balls, and that would be that. Congrats, you were born into it. Like, you don't have to learn to be brown-haired. You're simply born with brown hair. But being a man obviously can't be purely biological, because if it was, nobody would have to be taught to be it. It would simply be a fact of your birth. Having a penis is a fact of your birth, or not if you don't have one, I guess. Being a man is like, I'm going to dedicate the rest of my life to learning about the incredibly nuanced and often contradictory social standards that being a man means. I think he's mixing up the social aspect with the genetic aspect. Well, it's difficult to parse what he's saying in the best of times, but I think he's basically arguing that, like, even for a cisgender person, being a man falls in the realm of psychoanalysis, not purely biology, which is true. He is kind of like linguistically conflating sex and gender here, but I think the point that he's making here is actually quite good.
In this sense, all our sexual identity is trans. And this...
There you go. See? That was easy enough to parse.
I think, at least from what I've read, disappears in most of trans self-justification. Because if you try this analysis, they claim you want to crush my trans identity, reducing it to a phenomenon of such unconscious mechanisms and so on. I don't want to lose too much time here, but you know what shocks me here? Did you notice it? Is how many trans ideologists basically have no place for the Freudian unconscious.
Okay. He's gonna lose me a little bit here with the Freud shit, you know. But okay.
It's simply how I feel, my felt self-identity.
By which you mean the consciously felt, the feeling that you have that you recognize.
Okay, okay, I'm gonna be charitable here because I do think highly of his intelligence. I think that what Zizek is saying here is that a lot of trans people are unwilling to engage with the idea that there are underlying psychological mechanisms that inform their gender identity and that it's not purely a matter of identity. What he's essentially saying is like, you know, you were born a male and you now identify as a woman, and that process is something that involved a sort of extensive psychoanalytical buildup. There were traumas that happened, there were realizations, there were heel turns, there were moments of confusion that built you to what you are now. But trans people don't want to engage with that. They just want to simplify to the identity thing. And what he's saying in addition to this is, in fairness, what he is describing, this psychoanalytic process that leads you to believe in your gender or whatever, also applies to cisgender people. Does that make sense? Basically, he's saying like everyone's gender identity is a product of, in essence, sort of psychological trauma of a sort of a dialectical engagement with what you believe you are and what the world believes you are, and the fight and the disappointment and the confusion, the misunderstanding, the socialization that leads you to there. And that's true for cis and for trans people. And he's criticizing trans allies in the trans movement for not engaging with that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with what he's saying, but the contrary argument here is, of course, the reason why a lot of trans people don't want to engage with this is because, first of all, cis people don't have to. Cisgender people are never asked, like, hey, cisgender guy, can you engage with the psychoanalytic process by which you came to realize yourself to be a guy? Cisgender men aren't asked to do that. And also, we're not exactly operating in a neutral environment, right? Like, trans people aren't asked about the origins of their identity in like a purely intellectual way. Like, people aren't asking because they're curious. Overwhelmingly, these questions come from a place of like invalidation. And the invalidation isn't a good faith engagement with the thought process, right? It's not like conservatives are coming up with like excellent counter arguments to the psychoanalytic process or anything. They're basically just running up to you and screaming that you can't be the gender you say you are because of your genitals. So, yeah, does that make sense? Okay. I thought this would be worse, by the way, when this was linked. I'm actually quite happy with this, I feel. What he's saying. I mean, I think that there could be a counterpoint here, but yeah, no, this isn't at all like transphobic, I don't think.
Yeah,
within yourself.
Yeah, and then if you have doubts about your identity, they immediately project it onto social pressures, as if biology and society, especially society, tries to impose on us certain sexual identity, masculine, feminine, and so on, and then they rebel against it. The main reason is somehow I know immediately, not immediately. Okay, we enter here all this puberty blockers problem. It's a long path, but at the end,
dear.
You have to.
In the past, Zizek has been very critical.
Yeah, look, I don't think he needs to be like frothing at the mouth in hatred about trans people. But yeah, this sounds very trans medicalist. I know I think Vosh is being maybe a little bit easier on him than he would be usually. But I think from everything I've seen, both previously to this and from this directly, like, Slavoj Žižek is transphobic. Like, not in he's intellectually transphobic, if you want to put it that way.
Critical of puberty blockers on trans youth.
Cover what you really are. And that's my paradox, that trans people, many of them, whose point is against biological determinism, tend to replace it with another determinism. The idea is independently of what your body is, look deep into you, into your psyche, you will discover what you are.
Okay. I think I'm going to change the frame we're paused on. Okay. I think what he's saying here is partially true. Basically, what he's saying is that there are some trans people and trans activists who are replacing biological determinativism with identitarian determinativism, where the conversation is being taken from one wrong place, which is your genitals determine your biology. Is it determinism? Oh, that's so much easier to say. On one side, you have the incorrect assertion that it's just down to your genitals, and on the other side, you have pro-trans people who are saying, like, no, it's just your identity. Look deep inside, look within yourself, and you'll find your true identity. And I will say two things. For one, that's not all trans people. There are a lot of trans people who will argue, in my opinion correctly, that they may identify as a given gender, but that's just because that's, like, the one that's most comfortable to them. There is no, like, true psychological gender. And that's what I believe as well. The idea that humans are built and encoded with some kind of, like, innate gender identity is, in my opinion, only a slightly less reactionary idea than the idea that gender is innately tied to your biology. Like, in that, because at that point, you're basically doing the blue brain, pink brain, blue body, pink body thing, where it's like, yeah, you have sex, but also there's the brain gender, and you have to find the true brain gender, and that can be a different one sometimes, you know? In truth, you know, these identities are socially constructed. They vary across, you know, time and place and so on. And, you know, we settle into what's most comfortable for us, but there's not, like, an objective... Like, I guess the best way of putting this would be, if you took a guy who was completely comfortable in his gender identity, let's say just, like, the most cisgender guy, and he acted like a guy, and he dressed like a guy, and he talked like a guy, and he went after women like a guy, and everything, you know? If you took that guy and sort of, like, recreated the scenario, and you dropped him in the middle of the woods, and he raised himself up from a child with no exposure to society broadly, and then, only after he became an adult, you observed him and what he came to be, his understanding of his identity would be nothing like what it was before. Not only because of a different socialization, but because a lot of the stuff that was being a man was just socially tailored, you know? Like, maybe even if he was raised in the woods from day one or whatever, he still has, like, a personal value system that encourages stuff like self-reliance or strength or, you know, like traditional masculine virtues, I guess. His understanding of masculinity, he wouldn't even think of it as masculinity. It would just be him. In his mind, it would just be like, this is me, I guess. A lot of what we understand gender to be is very, very socially determined. Like, being a man in America today is nothing like being a man in America 100 years ago. Not even close. If you took a man from 100 years ago and brought him into today, he would be like this weird, jilted, socially awkward, uncomfortable. He wouldn't understand any social cues. The way he talked about and with people would be, yeah, they'd be autistic as shit. And likewise, if we sent people back to that time, even if both believe they're men, and they are, you know, that's just how it is. So essentially what Zizek is saying here is that. He's saying he doesn't like the identitarian determinism element. Now, to be fair, again, I think he's correct that identitarian determinism is a socially convenient way of explaining one's gender identity, but it's not the whole story, if that makes sense, right? Like, I think that if you're purely going off this, like, political, like, definitional defense of trans people, you can just go, oh, well, trans women are women because they identify as women, and a woman is a part of a social construct, and being a part of, like, a woman means you ascribe to this group or whatever. Like, you can do that if you want. There's a lot more truth and nuance underneath that, but you have to engage with it in good faith. And this is the case with all definitions. You have to engage with that in good faith, and again, conservatives just don't. A lot of the issues with trans people's poor definitions really does stem from the fact that they're fighting in an environment where their identities are being questioned by the stupidest and most bad faith people imaginable. Like, can you imagine trying to have a nuanced conversation about what is or is not American, or what is or is not a chair, when, like, the person you're talking to is just saying, like, a chair is anything that has legs. And you're like, what? Well, no, what about the... They're like, chairs, legs, chair. Like, what are you supposed to do in that environment, you know? Unfortunately, the quality of discourse kind of depends on both the people who are producing it and the people who are attacking it. Because you have to frame... If you're not careful about how you frame discourse in an environment where people aren't ready for it, you get shit like academics starting to use the term black bodies rather than black people. Or you get that like Harvard or that Smithsonian Museum pamphlet where they say like time and timeliness are white people constructs. Where if you have a PhD in sociology or like ethnic studies, you can look at that and you can go, oh, I can justify this, I can explain this. But if you're operating in an environment where the average person is not on board with understanding that reasoning, you're not really doing yourself many favors when it comes to like advocacy, right? So that's the reason why a lot of trans positive arguments get like really simplistic and really boiled down. Does that make sense? Does everyone gets what I'm saying, right? I do think it's like a problem, but I think ultimately this is a problem that's being created by outwardly antagonistic engagement from conservatives, not from trans people's fundamental inability to engage with these questions. Because I've talked to trans people one-on-one, and a lot of them seem to, like, you know, a lot of them seem, like, if you could, like, really get the truth out of a lot of people, I think that a lot of guys' understandings of masculinity are because they felt like their father was disappointed in them, and they want to do a better version than that. I think a lot of cisgender people in general have a very Freudian attitude towards their gender, where they had their mom or their dad to look up to, and if their dad was missing, or if their dad was an asshole, or if their mom was cold and distant, or if their mom was overly domestic and servile to an abusive father, a lot of their gender identity can literally be them just going like, I will not do that, I will not do that. And that can just inform like a lot of their brain, you know?
It's definitely my dad, anyway.
That's like a very psychoanalytical approach towards gender identity, and I think that's the case with a lot of cis people. But again, it's kind of a faux pas if you do that when you're gay or trans, right? Because if you're gay, like, it's kind of controversial to say something like, I don't know, like, I think maybe I might be gay because I saw what straightness looked in my dad and I didn't want to do that. And then it's like, oh, wow, you're gay because of trauma. But in truth, that's probably the case for a lot of people. A lot of people are straight because they grew up watching people being harassed for being, like, gay. So it's like, oh, like, they don't want to do that. So, like,
okay.
Yeah, you know, a lot of people who might have been otherwise bisexual.
I mean, there's an element here where I'm like, maybe, I don't think anyone's, like, forcing their sexuality, but I can see it kind of, at the very least, I can see it when it comes to, like, straight people, or people who identify as straight. They largely identify as straight because they were raised homophobically and don't feel comfortable identifying as like, bi or gay. And I guess someone could develop an aversion enough to, like, being straight and straightness that they would identify as gay. Like, the reverse could happen. Yeah. No, like, you guys get it, right? You guys get what I was just trying to articulate? Like, there are people who identify as straight who are in the closet right now, even though if in, like, a freer world they would identify as bi or gay. You can, like, conceptualize where, like, okay, cool. Yeah, somebody who identifies as gay because of, like, traumatic upbringing by straights, you know? You can conceptualize that.
Will get kind of pushed into being purely straight because the social consequences of not being straight in many cases, in many parts of the world, even today, continue to be lethal. So, you know, but it's you know, it's like a faux pas to say that if you're gay or trans, because then it's like, oh, so you're admitting it, it's all trauma. Okay, right, I think I've rambled on about this enough, but I'm surprised by the quality of discourse this particular Slavoj Žižek bit is igniting, I think.
On the other hand, biological determinists, I think, make the same mistake. You know what always shocked me? They claim sexual identity is biologically determined or in whatever way. It cannot be an effect of social pressures, ideological choices. But then they are so afraid of trans education in schools. I would say if they believe...
Good point. If you think that being Yeah, if all this is biologically determined, then why are you afraid of what you perceive to be instruction?
In your immediate biological identity, why be so afraid about all that? But not.
And if you believe that a person's true identity can be misshapen by grooming or by deception.
What? Wait a minute. Wait a minute.
Biological determinists, I think, make the same mistake. You know what always shocked me? They claim sexual identity is biologically determined or in whatever way. It cannot be an effect of social pressures, ideological choices. But then they are so afraid of trans education in schools. I would say if they believe...
Good point.
Gotcha.
If you think that being... if all this is biologically determined, then why are you afraid of what you perceive to be instruction?
In your immediate biological identity, why be so afraid about all that? But not.
And if you believe that a person's true identity can be misshapen by grooming or by deceptive instruction, why are you...
The issue I have with this, right, is that a lot of conservatives reject biological determinism on this one, and like the issue there is that they acknowledge that social influence might play a role, but their argument there is then we just need to make the social influence so bad that no one will identify as gay or bi, you know? We just need to send people to the conversion therapy camps. So, like, again, I'm not really comfortable with, like... I guess I'm not really comfortable with this idea, largely from, like, my experience growing up, which is that I needed that education, not necessarily to turn me trans, but I needed that education to, like, articulate my pre-existing feelings, you know? And I don't know to what degree those pre-existing feelings were socially or biologically or some combination of the two of them created, but, like, part of my issue here is I'm understanding why the initial viewer of this was confused at Slavoj Žižek's stance here, because, like, part of what he seems to be talking about here, while it could be interpreted as, like, a slam against conservative takes on gender, trans people, like, could also be a conservative argument. Could also be like him being transphobic. So I'm trying to nail down exactly where he's coming from here on all this, and it's very difficult.
In favor of conversion therapy or teaching people that you can't be trans or can't be gay, you're essentially openly admitting to doing the thing you're afraid of the opposition doing. Is this what everyone was calling him transphobic for, Vosh? No. He wrote up an article where he was very critical of trans youth taking puberty blockers. And I think that article had a lot of stupid arguments in it. I thought it was poorly written. This is much more well-reasoned, which makes me wonder, again, if he was, like, chloroformed before he wrote the article for that stupid, like, alt-populist, internet scene that he contributed to. Remember, we took a look at the people who were on the board, and a lot of them were reactionaries?
Like, I feel like, weirdly, my kind of... where I am coming down on this right now is kind of opposite where Vosh is. Or maybe I'm just not fully understand... like, my head is pretty fuzzy at the moment. So maybe I'm just not fully interpreting Vosh here, but... yeah. I don't know that I'm gonna see Slavoj Žižek at the end of this as some sort of defender of trans rights.
But it was like all alt-populist types. Didn't he double down afterwards? Yeah, but he could have had a second hit of chloroform. Let me believe, okay?
Not to lose time, my basic message here is a pretty simple one, I claim. It's that again, the basic paradox is how, and that would be maybe my modest, not even counter-argument, another aspect of what you pointed out. Yes, we want to be subversive, but then, in this woke universe of diversity, inclusivity, everything is permissible, and so on and so on. They wouldn't call it censorship, but regulation. And
you can tell which people in chat aren't used to listening to Slavoj Žižek talk, so when he says certain stuff, they're like, oh wow, mask off, but it's like, he's been doing this since like the 90s, you know?
Yeah, this is why I don't like watching him. I feel like I can arrive at similar ideas or arguments without having to interpret like this weird, messily phrased man.
Slavoj Žižek is a very smart person. I respect him in large part, I think, for often speaking on touchy social and cultural topics that a lot of people in his position would be scared to. No matter how smart you are, and he is very smart, you will sometimes make yourself look a fool when you're talking about contemporary stuff, modern social movements, modern problems, modern dilemmas, controversial political subjects. And I'm not saying he's never made mistakes. He definitely has. But I do respect his willingness to engage, I guess.
Prohibitions return with a vengeance. You know what is missing here? In traditional authority, if it wasn't too totalitarian, and mostly they were not, you never have only the existing ethical, political, social value system. Like...
you know who I'm talking about being disheveled.
You mentioned...
honestly, Žižek feels like modern-day Diogenes.
Traditional society, here I would supplement you. Remember, you said that there it was easy to be subversive because the rules were so obvious and strict. For example, in extreme...
this is what you would have ended up like if you didn't get in the group command. Oh, by the way, I just want to say, guys, that I had such an aspirational moment, like unironically, like such a gender moment for me. I was in J. Crew the other day. I didn't find my... Actually, that's where I got this shirt. Did I? No, I got this from Banana Republic. I got a different shirt from there. Anyway, I was in J. Crew. I got a belt for the J. Crew. But there was an old man in there. He must have been like 55 or 60 with like a full like salt and pepper beard and hair. And he looked awesome. He had on these like dark brown loafers and no, he had dark brown pants and black loafers, and he had like a thick knitted turtleneck with like a brown plaid tweed jacket that had patches on the elbows, and he had these thick framed glasses, and he looked like a model. He looked
Vosh, you just described a hot college professor. That's okay. Now we know Vosh's type.
So good. He looked insanely good. He looked like the kinds of guys who, like, you could, like, a picture of them could be posted on Twitter through some contrivance, and there would be like women of like any like 20s, 30s.
Oh hey,
being like,
it's VCC TV in the on-screen chat.
So aspirational. Did you compliment him? No, he was busy. I'm not gonna.
Oppressive.
I literally don't care.
Just having free sex is already subversion. But today, okay, first point. This was my big experience.
What is he waffling
my
about
epiphany
now?
Ideological.
I haven't heard a point in the past like minute and a half of him talking. What are we building towards?
Nothing.
When I was, oh my God, half a century ago.
Oh, I think he's off the gender section. Now we're on authority and unwritten rules. He loves to write about this. Why? Wait, hold on. Why is this section right here so replayed? Hold on, curiosity, morbid curiosity.
Achieve freedom by introducing restriction. So I'm not sure if there is a paradox here at all, unless you have a conception
that you guys
of freedom
like me.
that just means freedom from any kind of constraint. But as I say, I don't think that's a freedom worth wanting, because it would just look like uncontrollable chaos.
I see your point, and maybe I was unclear, but I, at some level, I think, profoundly agree with you. Just a couple of tricky supplements of mine. First, when you said totalitarianism, they know it better and so on. But you know what? For me, here I'm maybe a tiny shade more pessimist than you. Yes, I know this. The difference, one of the very simple differences between totalitarianism and mere authoritarianism is that authoritarians simply want to assert their authority. Sorry guys, we are blah blah. True totalitarians always add this, but we are doing it for you. We know better than you what you really want. And this is my old story that I like to repeat. That's why.
I think that's true to an extent, yeah. Yeah, if you take a look at, like, authoritarian regimes have been the norm throughout history, but totalitarian regimes usually do this, like, incredibly overreaching surveillance state where they try to insert themselves into every level of civic society because the narrative that they use to justify their level of total control is not just, oh yeah, we're in charge, but also like, we're doing this for the glory of the people or whatever. Totalitarianism needs the pretense that this is all being done for everyone's benefit, you know? Like, there are plenty of authoritarians in the past, and today, who never made that pretense. There was never, like, they never had to lie and pretend that they were doing this for some, like, greater cause or whatever. So, like, the Chinese Communist Party? Yes, yeah. The CCP is kind of an incomplete totalitarian government because they've built a lot of their real material power on opening up their markets, and the more open your markets are, the more difficult it is to fully control everything because it's really, really tough to have, like, power based in a free market economy when you're also fastidiously locking down every element of society. So you have a government, China, where Westerners can come and go as they please and basically do what they want when they're in China. Like, Westerners get a lot of leeway and permission, but at the same time, you have the social credit system. And at the same time, you have large swaths of China's rural areas that are not under very strict control because it's almost impossible to actually control them. So they're kind of like an incomplete totalitarian society. North Korea is complete, of course, obviously. The Soviet Union was complete within its more, like, industrialized areas, but I don't think they were fully in a lot of the more rural villages and outposts. They were in the more controlled areas. You know, yeah, there's some variance. Afghanistan is, I think this gets a little bit more complicated when you talk about Islamo-fascist societies because they lean more authoritarian. At the same time, you know, the Ayatollah and the Taliban do claim to be acting for the benefit of the people that they control, but there isn't really the same kind of, like, overwhelming surveillance state, certainly not in Afghanistan, but there is a morality police. I don't know, I feel like that might be a little bit more specific. I'm not sure.
For example, you find in Stalinism, which was at its high point totalitarian, reasoning which you would never have found in fascism, which is more authoritarian. For example, do you know that on Stalin's birthday...
No, we're not talking about gender anymore.
All gulags even, all prisoners were gathered and had to sign a telegram wishing Stalin all the best and so on, which was a madness, but they wanted to sustain this. Stalin is working for our own good, blah, blah, blah. Which is why a Stalinist leader never characterizes himself as a leader. It's the
public
servant of the people. Yeah. Okay, but let's drop that.
Hey, LB, how you doing?
It's interesting. It's interesting what you say there.
That is an interesting distinction because I think there's a lot you could do to read into this to give, from that definition at least, you could argue fairly that Stalin's government, Stalin's USSR, was significantly more totalitarian than Hitler's Germany, but a lot less authoritarian. The like bat of power was wielded a lot more brutally, and obviously to the end of many more lives in Germany. While there was this pretense under the Nazis of like, we are all doing this to lead the Aryan people to their like elbow room and blah blah, their Lebensraum or whatever, like we're doing this to the glorious Third Reich, the revival. In the Soviet Union, like you said, Hitler did not have his prisoners write him birthday cards. That's a very different level. Anyway, I think we've gotten what we need to out of this. That was a good discussion. I'm glad we talked about the trans stuff. Please stop this philosophical bullshit and show chat the Zizek N-word past story. It's so goddamn funny. You're right, it's very important.
Nah, I'm good. I'm good with that one. Let's see here. Oof, my back. Oh my goodness. Ugh. I'm feeling like I should go sleep. What do you think, chat? I'm sorry, LB. Go sleep. I am sick. Recover? Today's a work day, guys. I don't get sick days. Sleep on stream? I don't want to do that, you weirdos. Riverboat Jack stream. That's what I'm doing. Oh, Riverbed Jack stream. I can't get my camera in there, guys. LB.
BWA 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 BWA.
God, it goes hard. I love that beat. Thank you so much for the $10 dono, LV. I appreciate it. What if I made it worth your while to go to bed at 11? I could do that. I could do that 5 times. You still give out invites to the Progressive Victory Discord? Yeah. BWA 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 BWA. Can I have one? Yeah, I think you just have to type !victory. Nope. There we go. That should be it. Or PV. There we go. You gotta fill out the that form on the website, but then you'll get an invite link to the Discord. You look sick as hell and not in a good way. Oh, I'm sorry. BWA. BWA. Oh my god.
Go get some rest, you silly Billy. Get well, health comes first. Get some fluids in you before bed too. Preferably some Powerade, Gatorade, or Pedialyte.
I don't have any of those things, but I will get fluid in me. Paladin, that is incredibly generous of you. I will stay up until 11. That's 25 minutes from now. I can do this. I'm gonna wrap up this level. We got this. Or until you finish the mission? Okay. Dealsies. Whoopsies. All right. I thought maybe I could find a video. I thought I had one in mind, and I'm just not seeing it. It's not popping up again. Never mind. I can't show cute cat videos anymore, Chaotic Kitten. We're in Copyright Fortress arc for the next couple months, unfortunately. Sleep is good for you. You're good for me. That's right. Got him. No links for fur babies? No links for fur babies? I can look at pictures you all have personally taken, or videos you guys have personally taken, but I can't take links for fur babies, no. Unfortunately. Hey, Canadian Brunch. How you doing? You delightfully upbeat chatter, you. I will, but I'm gonna finish this mission first. God, my ability to enunciate is failing me. Flock of chicken ducks and turkeys. Would you like me to record a video of them so you have something to put on when you're going to the bathroom or something? Larzers, that'd be delightful. You guys care about me a lot, and that's really nice. So thank you all very, very much. Merry Christmas, Canadian Brunch. All part of a bigger family, true. Trying to figure out how long I've been subscribed. Yeah, it's probably been about 3 years. Which sounds crazy. But yeah, some of you guys have been around for like 3 or 4 years now. Hopefully still having a good time. That makes sense for you, Depor.
Spills on the ground.
We did it.
Oh, forgive me, brothers. Your deaths go unavenged.
I can go no further. I surrender, Denim. I'm too weary to go on.
Then your life is mine. I will not claim it here.
So I am to be your hostage. Do not think such tactics will dissuade the Duke.
You have it wrong. We wish only to clear our names. Watch with your eyes. Listen with your ears. Witness the truth of this war for yourself. If you still cannot trust me, your life will be yours once more, and my life yours as well.
Your words have a ring of truth, but I am a knight of Almorica. Honor demands evidence more substantial.
Then I will speak on this no more. Come, we should be going.
Da 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 da. Hey. Yeah, you've been in for the long haul, Mithril Mist.